morning and welcome to this, the TooFatLardies Oddcast. And today we hit the road once more on our way to one of the biggest lardy events of the calendar, Operation Market Larden in Evesham. This year it's OML 7. And once again we've got a great day of gaming ahead of us, topped off with a fine evening talking a heady mix of wargaming, military history and complete and utter nonsense. And once again I'm joined by the Jeremy Clarkson and James May of Wargaming, Richard Clark and Nick Skinner. Gentlemen, welcome to the Lardmobile.
On that bombshell.
Hello, Sidney.
Hello, Sidney.
Everybody.
Welcome back to the Oddcast, both of you. It's been a while since we last spoke.
Yeah.
So quite a lot of catching up to do. What have you both been up to?
Busy bunnies, really. We've been busy with the launch of Lard TV and getting a load of stuff done for that. We've actually been investing a lot of time and effort into getting some new kit. So we've got some new cameras, we've got some new sound equipment, which I managed to open the box, look at and realise I didn't understand it. So I'm looking forward to meeting Mike Whitaker today, who's going to give me a crash course in using clever technology for sound. So hopefully that will allow us to be all mic'd up with radio mics and everything. But yeah, we've been recording a couple of films for that, or 3 films really. We've recorded 2 games for a pint-sized campaign, the Jean Bleu Gap, which we've been using with the 1940 handbook, and that's been great fun. We've had 2 really good games there, and also doing a piece with Dave Brown playing General Darmé, and all of that of course is now on the cutting room bench or floor, so that's been keeping us really busy. And I'm also cracking on with my Nordyke 1940 pint-sized campaign, which is great. And I've been setting up a Discord campaign, because Nick's run several Discord campaigns, and I realised that we haven't actually done one for the lads at the club. So I thought I'd do one for some of the guys there, which we'll have more about once we get up and running. But suffice to say, it's World War II, historical, very much based on historical events, but with a bit of a twist, hopefully. So yeah, been very, very busy with that.
That really sounds fantastic. And what's the response to Lard TV been like? I mean, I've seen some of the videos and they really look splendid, but kind of like a biased audience, to be honest. What's everyone else been making of it?
First of all, my wife won't have it on in the house, but I don't think she's
Clothes.
She's not the target audience.
No, I don't think she's the target audience. But I mean, Rich, what kind of feedback have you had directly about it?
Yeah, fabulous. And I think some of the people have recognised that, you know, we're getting great feedback from people. Can you turn the volume up a bit? Can we have a few more close-up shots and things like that? Is all very much a learning curve that we're going through. And I think we're attempting to learn as we go, really. It would be lovely to have all the time in the world and to make 10 programmes just as testers to see how they look, but we don't have that luxury. But I think that people have always enjoyed seeing videos of games, because it's a great way to learn how to play a set of rules. And we're really trying to get the message across that whilst some of our filming techniques might be imperfect, hopefully people can see and enjoy what we're producing, in terms of at least they know we're enjoying what we're doing. So yeah, the feedback's been really great. We always get one person who every time we post a video on YouTube, very, very rapidly within the first hour or 2 comes in with a thumbs down to say they don't like what we're doing. So I'm speculating who that might be. I did suggest on Twitter that it could be former Page 3 girl Linda Lusardi, because I was never that fond of Linda. I was more of a Sam Fox guy, but I don't know if she's heard that and maybe it's got a bit of a downer on us as a result. But who knows? I don't know if you guys have got any idea who it could be.
I heard a rumour it was Tory Lord Howard, actually, who was doing that. It's kind of, you've got a track record of thumbs down behaviour. We'd love to know what other people think. Who could it be? We'd love to know your suggestions.
Yeah.
Tweet them into TooFatLardies.
Yeah.
And what about you, Nick? You've been obviously part of Lard TV, But what else have you been up to?
It's been a large part of it, actually.
Yeah, well, obviously I've been spending a lot of time in makeup and you know, having my prosthetic.
Not long enough.
No, having my prosthetic belly put on before each game. But no, we've been very busy. That's been good fun. The games have been great fun. It's been worth watching just to see how many things we get wrong actually in these games. I'm sure that people are very keen to point out bits where we get the rules wrong, and it's great that they do that. But they've been really good fun. Off camera, I've been working on Market Garden. We're still doing lots of research into Market Garden. I have next to me here absolutely fantastic, super duper book, which is almost as heavy as my lunchbox, about the operations around either side of sort of Camp Group Chill, which was heavily involved in the Ireland campaign.
That was one of the more laid-back camp groups, wasn't it?
Yeah, they were. That's right. They played lots of reggae music. And we've been playing through various scenarios and mini campaigns that are going to form part of that supplement.
Yeah.
So you may have seen, or people may have seen on Twitter or on Facebook, some photos from some of the games that we've been playing. We've been playing a game about the crossing of the Valor. We've been doing a game around pushing through Nijmegen. We've been doing games around Sombridge, and also a mini campaign around Wolfhazy and the British Paras at trying to push through to the Utrechtsweg and down onto Arnhem Bridge. So we're learning a lot about what those games need to look like and structuring campaigns within the campaign. Obviously, Market Garden is a huge operation. You know, from end to end, it's you've got various different sectors, various different troop types, and what we want to make sure in the campaign supplement is that you can play it in a variety of ways. You can play it from end to end, or you can come in and play the bit that you want to be able to play, and that the scenarios, of course, have historical relevance. We get the forces as accurate as we can, and that all takes time and research.
Yeah.
As we're going to talk about later on, actually, when we look at our big issue, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the great things that we're doing is that it's going to be nice to be able to play campaigns based on maybe the 82nd Airborne campaign, or the 101st, or the Setcraft campaign, or the Johnny Frost campaign, and so you can just take these cameo campaigns out of it and play them as standalone things, and then gradually stitch together the whole tapestry to see how the whole operation works. But yeah, it's great fun, and some fabulous fun doing the research based on the foundations that we laid when we travelled over there last November, and Nick and I are certainly hoping to go out there again in the next couple of months to have another look and focus on some of the areas that maybe we had to just gloss over because of the amount of time available. But yeah, great fun. One of the best things about our job is that we can pretend to be military historians, and doing that research is just a great pleasure.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. And I think, as you say, Nick, that book, which I think is Autumn Gale or Herbsturm, that does look just like a fantastic resource, and it's just the sort of book that we've talked about on the Oddcast before, which has maps, which has detailed unit information at a fairly granular level, but is large enough to cover the significant tactical or operational scale of things which are going on. And also, I think what's really interesting is the way that you're stitching together not just different bits of the campaign which are well known, but also some of those aspects which are happening, if you like, off the main focus of the campaign. Yeah. So important to put even a large campaign like Market Garden in the context of what's happening either side of it. I think that's really fascinating.
I think that's really important, actually, because we all focus on 30 Corps, but, to the left flank, you've got 12 Corps who are pushing up, attempting to ensure that 30 Corps wasn't just opening up a breach a couple of miles wide, a sort of corridor they could drive up, but to ensure that breach was burst right open, and you've got another Corps running up the right flank, which is on its way to the Groesbeek Heights, and basically trying to expand the bulge as far as the German border.
Well, excellent stuff. We're not going to take too much more of that because that's going to spoil all the fun for later in the Oddcast.
Yeah.
But as we...
You mean there's fun later on as well as now?
There's lots more fun to come.
Splendid.
But as we speed across the South Midlands of England, we can't visit the workshop, I'm afraid. Now, I know you've both been really busy, But let's just focus on the hobby aspects and say, well, what have you got on the bench at the moment?
Not a lot, actually. I've had on the bench my French for the Jean Bleubac Gap campaign. So I've got them done. I'm really, really pleased with them. I used fairly unusual technique. I wanted to get that French uniform they've got, which is a greeny brown, which somehow fades to a more browny brown. So what I did was I undercoated that with a Humbrol Dark Earth spray can, and then I used a more greeny brown as a wash over the top of that, which actually came out with some really nice results in terms of getting that almost translucence, where you've got a brown with a hint of green over the top. I'm just trying to think of the name of the bloody paint I used for that.
The strange thing about the French uniforms is that they are uniformly awkward, like World War One, the Horizon Bleu, and World War Two, as you say, those dyes are fading in the field.
They're a bugger to get right, and it's a bugger to get the paint matching right. But I find that you go online and you get lots of sites saying, oh, use this colour, use that colour. I think the best way to do it for me is to look at the pictures and have a look at reenactors, because that often you'll see how uniforms fade, and then make your own decision on what colour you think it ought to be. I think I used a bronze green for the helmet. I'm just trying to think of what I used. It's the same Vallejo colour that I use for US tanks, and it's a kind of muddy greeny colour. Can't remember the name of it. As we say, we're not in the workshop, obviously. At this moment in time, we are speeding past Milton Keynes.
Is it olive brown or something like that?
It's not, but it's something muddy.
What I find is that there are so many greens that are, they're so closely matched, some of these colours, and actually a little bit of variation within a unit is entirely reasonable.
There's a guy on either Facebook or I think it was Facebook, I think it was the Chain of Command Australia group, who posted an image of like 20 or 30 field grey jackets, German Army, Second World War, and the range of colours was almost rainbow-esque. Well, the interesting thing is they were all definitely green, none of them were grey. So that field grey is very definitely a green colour. But so I've been doing my French, and I've been doing my Fallschirmjäger, early war Fallschirmjäger for Nordyke. And they've been fun. I've used a mixture of Foundry and Crusader miniatures. I did try and add some Perrys in, but I found the Perrys really didn't match in terms of scale, and they were a lot more equipped for Crete, a lot more shirt sleeve order. So I gave them to Wee Doogie, the traitor McKipper, and I did add in some Warlord Fallschirmjäger, who are largely in later war jackets rather than the early war full body smocks. But I did a bit of conversion there with green stuff and cutting bits away, and I got the result I wanted there. So I've really been busy with figures rather than anything else. Nick, what about you?
A mix. So I've been continuing to bash on with Recce. This is putting together armoured car reconnaissance units for the British Army for Northwest Europe. What I'm trying to do is create a British reconnaissance troop. Now, reconnaissance squadrons in the British Army in 1944 had a whole mix of hardware in them, a whole mix of vehicles. So we've got the Dingoes, that obviously the two-man scout cars that were being used. Also, we've got Daimler armoured cars. In the same troop, you might, or in the same squadron, you might have Staghounds in the HQ elements, and then you've got a support troop which is made up of the AEC, depends which mark, but the AEC armour cars, they're the big ones. And of course I like my stuff to be in 1/48, so I've been trying to get these. Big means big, and in the last, I think it was in the last Oddcast, I said I was struggling to get a 1/48 Daimler. Well, of course, such is the success and reach of the Oddcast that within minutes I was inundated with many messages from people suggesting where I could get my hands on a 1/48 Daimler armoured car, and I managed to get hold of two from Romania, from West Models, WESPE, And I was a little bit nervous about them because, to be honest, I thought the artwork didn't look great. But actually, when the model came through and I opened the box, I ordered 2 and 1 model arrived, and I thought, oh God, here we go. But I got in contact with them, and the guy at the other end was brilliant. Actually, he's really sorry that they sent me 1, and he immediately offered, what else could I send you with free postage with the other armour car. So I said, don't worry about that. Just send me the one that I want, and I've got them both now. I've made one of them because of the gap in the timings. Made one of them. It was a very difficult model to make. I'm not a bad model maker. There are many guys who are worse than me. Equally, there are equal number of blokes who are a lot the other way. So that's the word, better. Better than me. And so I'm kind of in the middle, I guess. I made a lot of kits. This was a hard model to make. It was a resin kit. Most of the pieces went together really, really nicely. The suspension units on the wheels, however, were a complete nightmare. But I managed to get something worked out with super glue, PVA, even a bit of hard as nails glue in there as well, to try and make them Richard Clark proof. Because there's one thing putting the wheels on, another thing making it so that old clobber hands over there can use them without smashing them into 1,000 pieces. So I'm really pleased with the outputs on that. The other Daimler is a Tamiya. The AECs I got, Blitzkrieg models had an Easter sale, and I managed to order some AEC armour cars from them. My word, they really are big. And when I got it out the box, I thought, crikey, that's big. Even in 1/48, it looks like it's an out-of-scale model. And then you sort of Google the dimensions of the AEC armoured car, and you say, well, actually, in terms of, the rectangular box of the chassis, isn't that too dissimilar to a Panzer IV? So you then put it next to a 1/48 Panzer IV, and it's, it's just a little bit smaller, which is what it should be. And you think, my God, this is a beast of an armoured car.
Yeah.
And I've got those at the moment. We're at the stage where I'm just going to be working on the final weathering of those AECs, and it's in doing those weatherings that I could come on the piece that I'm going to nominate for the best bit on the bench, Sidney.
Yes.
Because yeah, absolutely. So I got some. I did a damaged Sherman tank. I wanted to make a burnt out Sherman tank. So I made this Sherman tank. I sort of customised it a little bit as best I could for a Warlord model, and I wanted it to look damaged. I put it on Twitter. I wasn't very happy with it. I said, look guys, I've done this Sherman. I've tried to make it look damaged. Like it's been on fire. It just doesn't look right for me. What do you suggest? And again, Twitter came to the rescue. I got loads of suggestions about what I could do with my Sherman tank. And of the legal ones, some of the most useful ones were about how I could add that weathering to make it look even more burnt out. So, thanks to Jeremy, South African Jeremy, really, for leading the charge on these MIG pigments, these MIG pigments that you can buy, which are just basically like, how would you describe them? They're just powder. They're just small pots of powder. And you can buy them and you apply the powder. You have to apply a fixer to it, otherwise you just get covered in powder because it's just like dry powder. But there are various colours and techniques. They do excellent soot black, and the rust colours that you can build up on top of that were really, really superb. Obviously, if something catches fire, I never really thought very much about the process of what happens when a tank catches fire, but apparently there's an oxidisation process that happens, which means it doesn't just go black, but you get like a rust as well with that. So I'm trying to model what that looks like. I haven't quite finished it yet, but I'm hoping to finish that when we get back from Evesham. But those pigments, those MIG pigments, are absolutely bloody brilliant. I would not have looked at those previously as a wargamer. As somebody who likes to make, do and mend, I wouldn't have said that it's worth the investment of buying a pot of powder. But if there's such a thing as love at first sight in wargaming, then these pigments could be it, because for me they've really given me the ability to transform some models that I think are already pretty good into something that I think is going to be really bloody good, and that is really I'm really pleased about that. So that whole recce thing for me is still continuing in the workshop. I've also got on the work bench 2 other things that I want to mention as well. From Colin Farrant at Charlie Foxtrot's Models, he's brought out a new hotel. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yes, I saw one made by a chap in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, and well, I'll tell you what, he's done a fantastic job. Mine is still in the bag, but this looks like a masterpiece. It's going to be a huge hotel. It's based on a hotel in Carentan, I believe, in Normandy, and Colin's brought that out, and it looks absolutely stunning. His other buildings are brilliant, and I've no doubt at all when I put this one together, I just really hope I can do it some kind of justice. So that's on the workbench as well, and I'm really looking forward to getting the time to sit down and put that jigsaw together, because that's going to look fantastic. And the third thing, Sid, you'll be interested in this, is slightly outside of the normal lard zone, but I've got those figures from War Bases for the All for One Musketeer range that you and I are going to be doing some work on later this year. So really nice figures come through from Martin. Got some Red Guard, got some Musketeers, so looking forward to painting something a bit different and getting some burnished steel and some nice colours on those Red Guard. I need your artistic input with those, Sid.
Well, I'll do my best.
Do they do a Dogtanian figure?
Not yet, but I'm sure.
That one for all. That was great.
Yeah.
Well, there's still that chance that we can get our green stuff out and start converting. But back to the MIG pigments. I mean, they're a bit intimidating to use first time round. I used them on the World War I tanks a few years back. There's a lot of good videos on the internet, but there's also some DVDs which MIG produces, which are well worth hunting out or having a look at. And the way that I did it was very much with fixative, but also if you use a water-based suspension, and Plaka used to do something called vasobasis, the pigments really dilute beautifully, and you can almost use them as sort of paint or diluted paint. And the rust ones and the soot ones are really, really good around the exhaust channels of various tanks. And
right, hold on a minute. So, because I've heard about pigments, but I've never ever seen them. So you're talking about bassa, blah blah blah, some gibberish. This means nothing to me. How would you actually use it? Can you describe what the stuff's like, what this stuff you put on it's about, how it goes together, and how you apply it in detail? Because I haven't got a clue, and I'm sure lots of other people won't.
Okay, okay. Well, I can tell you what you get when you buy a pot of pigment.
Yeah.
Imagine if you go into your kitchen cupboard,
yeah,
and you go to the spice cupboard and you open up the jar of paprika,
yeah,
and you look at what's inside the jar of paprika,
yeah,
and that is what you get.
Right.
Okay, it just looks like a powder. It's just a very, very, very fine powder,
okay,
or very finely ground coffee. So it just comes as a powder, nothing else. But then you have to apply some magic to it, and Sidney is the man for the magic.
Well, before we go on to the magic, how did you do your pigments? And I'll tell you how you did mine. So you start.
No. Well, okay. Well, because the first thing I did, Mr. Enthusiastic, was I'm going to brush this straight on the model and see how it looks. And of course, you can do that, and it looks bloody brilliant. But of course, if you then try to fix that in place and spray a varnish on it, for instance, it just disappears.
Oh,
so you have to add it as the very last thing if you're going to do it as a powder. But but Sidney's going to talk us through the technical way of getting it right, because I don't think I've got it right yet, and I'm going to learn from Sid as well.
Well, so I think there's probably a number of different ways you can do it. The way I used it was that when I first started doing it around about 2010, 2011, I don't think there was quite as many videos out there, which is why I bought the DVD from Mick himself. And
so who's this geezer?
He's a Spanish gentleman. I think he's called Miguel. Apologies if he's listening. And he's abbreviated his name to Mig, and he has a business in Spain, and it's quite an extensive business now. I think he started out producing pigments, which, as Nick says, are almost like in a small tub about the size of a games workshop, sort of old style pot of paint, and you get the pigment in there, and they used to come through the post, but I mean now you can buy them fairly extensively, and now he's got a set of paints and all sorts of different inks and varnishes.
I actually got mine on Amazon of all places.
Yeah. So his operation is very much like perhaps a slightly smaller version of Vallejo.
Right.
But he's a really nice guy. He's very accessible, and so I had a few emails with him.
And he also has done a number of books. So what led me onto the range was the recommendation from Jeremy about the books that this guy's done. I think his name is Jimenez. So it's Jimenez. Enez, I think.
Jimenez,
Yeah, and he's done a number of books about weathering techniques on armoured vehicles.
Right.
And if you look at his stuff, you might be looking at the real tank. So he's got great techniques for applying chipping, etc.
Oh.
But Sid, come on, tell us, what do we actually do?
Well, what you can't do is what everyone starts with doing is that they just dust on the pigment and it looks fantastic because it easily wears off.
Yeah.
And what you also can't really do is spray varnish it because again it just flies off.
Yeah, I found those two things out.
Yeah, so what I did is I had a water-based adhesive medium. That doesn't mean that it's full of glue, it's just a water-based medium, and I got mine from Plaka in Germany, which used to be my go-to range of paints before Vallejo became really popular. And the water-based medium is a really sort of thick medium. It's almost like a very runny sort of glue, and you paint that on and you can adhere and sort of dust on the pigments in respect to that, and they will stay on the vehicle surface.
So when you apply it, you paint on the glue.
Yeah,
and then you sprinkle it on.
Yeah.
Oh, I couldn't do that.
But it's very you don't really paint it on. You sort of it's a really thin layer because the water-based adhesive the water-based medium is almost like a varnish. But the other way you can do it is you can actually dilute the pigment in the medium, and then you can paint that on
with a brush.
Yeah.
I'm told that you can also use white spirits.
Yeah, I was going to say, would an alcohol-based pigment thinner do, because that would then evaporate and leave the stuff in. But I'd have thought the issue there is when you varnish it would blow away again.
Yeah, I tried it with the white spirit, and I didn't have as much success doing that as I had with the Plaka water basis. But there's various different ways that you can do it, which are online. I just felt that the stuff which I did with the water-based medium, that really stuck on. The stuff I did with the white spirit or the turpentine, that it wore off, I think, is the best description of it. Yeah. But there's also loads of little tricks that you can do in combination with that, like running pencils, a HB or a double B pencil in respect of around the cowling and around the bits which get worn away, which is probably an older style sort of trick. There is a great, there were two, it's a one or two, I can't remember, but there's a fantastic Forge World, Games Workshop Forge World book all about modelling sort of 40k, Warhammer 40k tanks. And that book has a lot of these tricks in there. I can't remember the name of it, and we're not at the library at the moment, but that is well worth looking at. Unfortunately, it's quite an expensive book. I seem to remember it's about £25-30, but the beauty of that book is it's explained in great detail for the duffers like me to actually go through step by step, and they do it on about a dozen tanks. Now, these are sci-fi tanks, but it doesn't really matter because it's exactly the same principle.
And they are very big on heavy weathering and stuff like that.
So lots and lots.
The techniques are the same.
Lots of weathering, details on airbrushing, details on using sponges to create paint chips, using pencils to rub off paint, using fixatives and mediums.
Perhaps we could get the name of this and put it in the show notes below, because one of the things I want to do, we often talk about a lot of these things. I just chuck this on YouTube and then we don't ever think about it, but maybe we ought to be putting some notes on, and this sounds like a good starting point for doing that.
We could certainly do that, and I would definitely recommend that book, so we should certainly do it. It's got work by people like Dave Andrews, Mark Bedford, some really amazing...
Not David Bedford.
Not Dave Bedford, no.
Some really amazing modelers, and it's a fantastic book. So we'll get the details of that, and that has a lot of the techniques which we've just talked about in that book. And we'll also put the link to Meg's DVDs, which are really beautifully produced and well worth watching.
Yeah.
And I think also my reflection on this is that actually I never used to be bothered with doing this kind of stuff, but I think the fact that the quality of the models in the hobby is at the point where they can take these kind of techniques and you can use them to get some fantastic outcomes is an interesting point.
There was a guy, and again it was either Twitter or Facebook, who posted some photos within the last week of some 20mm Soviet tanks that he'd done. It was like being in a museum and looking at the real thing. It was just gobsmacking, and that was largely due to real heavy weathering. I couldn't believe how heavy the weathering was, but how effective it was. And also this zenith technique, of using different shades as an undercoat and then airbrushing your colour on top of that to get various tones coming through, so that the painting techniques in the hobby are coming on leaps and bounds.
I know, I've always managed to resist the temptation to buy an airbrush, because I know that it's something that I would struggle with and will make a big mess with.
It's not just ourselves in Lard Island who've been busy. As usual, we've had Lardy events going on all around the globe. And in particular, Lard America has held a great event at Gettysburg recently called Pickett's Large. A whole bunch of gamers playing all sorts of Lardy games, and fortunately we have a roving reporter on hand to hear all about it.
We certainly do, Sidney. We're very lucky to have Andrew France out there in Gettysburg organising it for us. Let's hear it from Andrew.
This weekend we have the inaugural Pickett's Lard Day here in historic Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Hosting an event like this, and particularly one near the battlefield, was something that a number of members of the Lard America group, particularly those in the Mid-Atlantic, have been wanting to do for a while. And we had talked about it for a few months and kind of dragged our feet. And ultimately at our last big regional show at Cold Wars this past March, over a couple beers, we were talking and we all kind of agreed, well, why don't we just do it? And so myself and fellow Lardy and good friend Chris Thomas, who lives in the area, decided we'd take up the mantle and get things running. Early May was going to be the best time for a lot of people involved, so we didn't give ourselves a lot of time to put it together. We had about 6 weeks, but thanks to some advertising and talking up on the Facebook group and the TooFatLardies forum and Twitter and even on the Oddcast, we got a pretty good response. A lot of people interested, a lot of people willing to make their schedules work, and so all told, we have just over a dozen gamers here and a few people who've said they'd come in to just see what this was all about. And a wide array of gamers as well. Veteran Lardy game masters and players, veteran wargamers, but people new to TooFatLardies games, and some people new to historical wargaming or new to new to wargaming in general. So a really great mix of folks. And everybody was really enthusiastic and excited about it. It had all the makings of a great weekend. And I, particularly in planning the event, really wanted to have the three essential parts of any great TooFatLardies event. And that's, of course, wonderful games being played. We had, I'm going to have games of Chain of Command and What a Tanker and Sharp Practice. A second element, of course, is just the fellowship, the great camaraderie that Lard players all over the country and all over the world seem to have. We want to make sure no matter what happens in the game, everybody has a good time. We've provided food and drink and a space just to hang out. And, of course, the third aspect, because we are historical gamers, we wanted there to be some type of historical element. And we've all heard Richard and Nick and Sidney talk about their exploits on battlefield walking, and so I offered to give some battlefield tours of the Gettysburg battlefield to those who were making a weekend out of it and staying over to Sunday. So really just a great event we were able to throw together. And so now took the time to chat with a few of our participants, and you can hear from some other folks how the event turned out.
So we're here at Pickett's Lard with Tim Cameron, one of our attendees. Tim is actually a first-time TooFatLardies game master and first-time Chain of Command player today. So what did you think of the event today, Tim?
Oh, I had a lot of fun. It was a good event to be able to come this way and to actually sit down and enjoy some good fun war games with some good fun wargaming enthusiasts.
That sounds like a Lardy event. So your game this morning, the one that you ran, your sharp practice game, was a little bit on the usual side. Why don't you tell us about that?
So it was a sharp practice game. However, it was using hypothetical forces with entirely Lego minifigures as the actual combatants.
Nice. And these were just Lego minifigures straight out of the box, or were they some custom pieces?
They were some custom pieces. So you take some of the Lego Pirates government factions, a couple of custom 3D printed Shakos, or some purpose-made other pieces, some special backpacks and the like. Certain jackets combined with certain legs that would not have been found out of the box, put a certain Shako on them, and next thing you know, you have something that looks vaguely like Brunswickers, even though we weren't calling them Brunswickers for the purposes of this game.
And players enjoyed the game? How'd the game turn out?
It turned out all right. Oddly enough, one of the weird things about this one is it seemed that most of the combat was resolved in fisticuffs. Some of that might have been just the scenario design. We went a little cavalry heavy, but just right off the deployment point, right into ambushing other pieces and or other players. And next thing you know, it was the first 5 combats we had were fisticuffs. And 2 of those were right actually on pretty much the first card draw.
Yeah, it seemed like it got pretty bloody pretty quick.
Yes.
And then this afternoon, in our second session, you played your first game of Chain of Command, correct?
I did.
Why don't you tell us a little about that? How'd that go?
That was actually pretty fun, too, getting to play Soviets somewhere near Smolensk, 1940 time frame. I was playing against another Chain of Command novice. He'd played 1 game before. This is my first Chain of Command game. He admitted that he kept looking at things from a Warhammer 40K perspective. I kept looking at things from a Napoleonic perspective, so the way we were employing our troops was just all wrong for the weapons we had. But it was great until my left flanks collapsed and the panzers were coming.
Well, we can't fault the commander of the troops on your left flank that much, correct?
Can we, Andrew?
I don't know about that. But you did have a very novel way of knocking out a German armored car, though. Isn't that true?
Yes. So I had the anti-tank hero who showed up and did one thing. So the anti-tank rifleman deploys off of his point, fires point blank through a fence at a panzer, which causes the panzer to explode, killing his loader, putting 2 points of shock on him, and he routs from the table, all on his just initial deployment.
But you knocked out the German armored car, so that's the important part,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
Very good. So if this event's held again next year, we'd come for a second time?
Oh, absolutely.
Great. And maybe run some even bigger and better Lego sharp practice?
Less horse, more infantry, but yes, definitely.
Well, we're looking forward to it. Thanks, Tim. And this is Andrew here again with Colin Hillard, our youngest Lardy here today. You came in with your dad today?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And you've done some TooFatLardies games before today?
Yeah, I've played What a Tanker in the past.
Okay, and so what games did you play today?
I played Sharps Practice for the first time, and I also played Chain of the Command for the first time.
Cool. And did how those games go? Do you have a favorite one of the ones you played?
I think I like Chain of Command more.
Yeah.
I don't know why. It's just the way it played out. It was more action heavy.
Sure.
I like that more.
Yeah, and you guys were doing a 1940 scenario. What force did you have? What were you playing with?
Both times I played, I was on the Allied team, where the goal was to try and blow the bridge before the Germans captured it.
And how'd that work out for you guys?
I won both times.
Well, that you can't do much better than that.
Yeah.
So you think you'll probably play some more Chain of Command in the future at future shows?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And you might put some Chain of Command stuff together for your own collection?
Yeah, I'd think so.
Nice. Do you like the 1940 campaign? Do you think you might try something different?
The 1940 campaign was fun. I think a later war would be a lot more interesting with the heavier tanks.
Oh, sure. And maybe some different platoon structures and some more fun weapons combinations too.
Yeah.
So do you think you guys will make the trip for Pickett's Lard again if it happens next year?
I think we would.
Sweet. Awesome. That's what we like to hear. Well, thanks, Colin. I'm glad you and your dad had a good day, and hopefully we'll see you guys again next year. So we're here with award-winning Lard America Game Master Ed Leland, who both ran and played Chain of Command today, running his great early to mid-war Eastern Front setup. So what did you think about the inaugural Pickett's Lard event?
I loved it. I got to meet some new people. I got to introduce some new people to Lard games. I had people who had never played my game before play it. I got useful feedback, and it looked like everybody had a good time at every single game that was run.
Yeah. And that's the important thing. That's the whole point of Lard games and Lard days. If people aren't enjoying themselves, then we're doing something wrong.
Well, and I mean, there's a hardcore of dedicated Lard America members, and we're going to show up. What I was gratified to see is that there was a significant participation outside of that. We got to introduce what we love to folks who would not have been introduced to it otherwise.
Absolutely. I mean, I think just from talking to people, it seemed like there were a lot of people today who, whether it was their game of Chain of Command or Sharp Practice or even What a Tanker, I'd say most of the people who were here today played one TooFatLardies game that they had never played before, if not 2 games that they had never played before.
And I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. And so so you said the game mastering went well. How'd the game go that you played this morning? Tell us a little about that.
Well, you know very well.
Well, our admiring fans don't know, Ed.
It was a very interesting sea lion game. And I was lucky enough to draw the plucky British defending against the Fallschirmjägers. And the structure of the game was interesting in that even though I pretty much literally died to the man, I delayed enough that it at least was a draw. So I think it's an interesting scenario design challenge to take unequal forces and figure out some way to balance the victory conditions so that even if someone just does as well as they can in that situation, they still have a chance to win, even though their forces are not particularly good.
Sure. And I mean, it didn't help your side that much that your support options included a not so useful, antiquated First World War Krupp gun, but...
I'm just glad it didn't blow up.
Well, this is true. You did roll several double ones. You didn't quite get that third one.
Yes.
And you did say your now famed Eastern Front setup is going to be maybe on the back, put back on the shelf a little bit. You said you do have a new project coming for the next big Lard America event?
Yes, for Historicon, inspired by the posts of Rich and his explorations of Malaysia. I have found a pretty interesting historical situation in Malaysia where the Australians are having to counterattack and clear a roadblock to escape Japanese encirclement in Malaysia. And it looks like it's got enough to be both aesthetically interesting and tactically interesting, which is a hard balance to achieve.
Sure. Well, and you certainly handle, having seen your games at several shows, you certainly handle the aesthetically pleasing very well.
Well, I'm not so much. I find interesting things that I can interest my wife in helping me build.
I've tried to convince my own significant other to do that for me, but the missus just doesn't quite want to build buildings. So it sounds like you've got yourself a very good better half there.
Yes, very, very much so.
Well, it'll be interesting to see you make the transition from the forests of Western Russia to the jungles of Malaysia, but I can't wait to see your new product, and I'm sure you'll have some great scenarios designed for it.
I hope so. I hope everybody will be as happy with it as they have been with this one.
And the last question we were asking everybody else, so this was the inaugural Pickett's Lard. If we do this again next year, would you come up for it again?
Absolutely.
Great. And hey, the weekend's not even over, so who knows, we might even find more reasons to have you stick around. But thanks, Ed. Thanks again for helping to run a game at the event, and thanks for playing, and hopefully we'll see you next year.
Thank you, and thank you for helping run this.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad everyone had a good time.
Well, that's fantastic. So thanks very much for that. That's a fantastic report, and I think we've said it before, no harm in saying it again. There can be no better place to play an American Civil War game than Gettysburg. What a fantastic event. Congratulations to everyone concerned with all of that, and in particular to the guys at Lard America who have been working really hard on developing their games over in the States.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that Lard America are going from strength to strength, as we'll talk about when we're looking at this year's Historicon, which is coming up, where they're going to have a fabulous presence for the first time. They've got their own dedicated area. HMGS have now registered Lard America as one of the official societies who are attending, and I think it's the space they're taking up and the games they're putting on are one of the largest individual groups in at Historicon this year, which is going to be fabulous.
Absolutely. And Rich, you yourself have been travelling as well, not to the US of A this time, but Peterborough, England. Yeah. I hope you weren't standing in the most recent by-election there.
No, absolutely not. I was not standing there. I was up there for Posh Lard, which is being run by Mike Whitaker and the guys from the Peterborough Wargames Club. And I had an opportunity to speak to some of the people there. Very much a an invasions-themed event, because this was happening the weekend just before the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And I went down there and had a chat to some of the people there. Well, here I am at Posh Lard with Mike Whitaker. Mike, tell me about the game you're running here today.
It's the inevitable bloody Omaha, as seen at Salute.
Right.
And, well, the Americans are doing about as well as they usually do.
Yeah, it is bloody, isn't it? And it is Omaha.
It's very definitely Omaha. We have a complete boat section that's made it onto the shingle.
Yeah.
The shallows are littered with Americans trying to get out of the water and onto the beach. Up at the western end, we have 2 engineer teams and a leader wondering what the hell to do next. And other than that, it's a right mess.
Yeah. Which of course is a fabulous representation of what really happened on the day. It'll be great to see how things go. And we've got some really nice games here. Of course, this is 75th anniversary of D-Day this week, which is really the theme for the event.
Well, we went for the theme of invasions because
Rich
Crawley has brought his decidedly insane Italian invasion of France.
I was looking at that, and it is decidedly insane.
It's a fabulous game. I got to play it at Crisis Point, and it's a very interesting game.
There's some lovely models on there, really, really fabulous.
The Italian machine gun sections are a bit of a swine to face.
Yeah. Great. Well, nice to speak to you, and carry on enjoying your game. Thanks.
I have every intention of killing more Americans.
I think you like this game because you get to shoot everybody, don't you?
I do actually feel a little guilty about it. When you're handing out sort of 5 hits and a pin on a regular basis.
Right, have a good time. Thanks, Mike. Cheers. Right, Phil, I'm here with Phil and Jenny, putting on another fabulous game, and this is something to do with Normandy. We're near St Mary-Glees, I believe.
Yeah, we're just outside St Mary-Glees.
Right.
Colonel Vanderbilt dropped with the 82nd Airborne.
Yeah, that's John Wayne to you and me.
John Wayne, that's
definitely
John Wayne. Broke his ankle.
Yeah.
And his platoon have got to get him through the small village to St Mary-Glees. Right. It's a probe mission for Chain of Command, but it's getting John Wayne across the board.
Right.
And at the moment, we're getting nowhere.
Right. And it's probe round the bend, isn't it? Really, he's got to go up and round and back on himself.
It's a
great,
long way round.
Great looking game. Fabulous, Jenny. I believe you're responsible for all these fabulous looking buildings.
I am, yes, yeah.
Yeah, they look absolutely great. I think you've done a fabulous job here. And how long does it take you to put all this lot together?
Years.
Right. Okay.
Literally years.
Yeah. No, it really does.
We keep adding to it, and I've got 2 more buildings to go, and then I think we can safely say we're done then.
Right.
I think we can do the entirety of Normandy on a 1-to-1 scale.
It looks like most of France could be covered with what you've got here.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great looking game, and the Germans are having some effect, I believe.
We are, yeah. They've had to go off the road, and Colonel Vanderbilt hasn't actually got on the table yet.
Right.
So.
You know what? He needs a horse. It's John Wayne. It's no good pushing him around a wheelbarrow.
Cart, no.
He needs a horse. Then he'd be all right. Right. Well, it's a brilliant looking game, and thanks for bringing it along today. Right, well, here we are. I'm with Richard Crawley. So here we are, Richard, pair of dicks.
Yes.
And tell us about the game you're running today.
Well, we've just finished the first playthrough of Monton 1940.
Right.
And that is the rather failed Italian invasion of France. Mussolini trying to get himself a seat at the peace talks table by getting a few Italians killed, which he seems to have done quite effectively in reality. But not today. In fact, the French were horribly beaten.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh well. Well, it certainly is a fabulous looking table, which really looks like the south of France. We're transported to the Riviera here, aren't we?
Yes, I thought the swimming pool was what it needed to give the south of France feel.
It really is. I'm due to go on holiday in about 10 days, and this has really got me yearning for a quick dip now. But yeah, it really does look fabulous. Well, thanks very much for bringing it along, and nice to see a game being played in 20mm, which I think is a great scale for Chain of Command.
It's spot on for Chain of Command.
It really just gives you that bit more elbow room on the table, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Over 28, and yet the figures are big enough and detailed enough for you to actually feel an affinity with them.
Indeed.
Yeah. No, great looking game. Thanks very much for bringing it with you today.
No problem.
So that sounds like a fantastic event. Well done, Mike, and all the guys down at Peterborough in respect of Posh Lard. So, gentlemen, we have no sofa of sincerity this week, but the sumptuous upholstery in Lardmobile 4 will do in its place, I think. And as usual, I've been having a good feel around in my sack to see if I could find a big issue for us to get our teeth into.
Did you find one?
I did. I found a fantastic email from Barry in Bury St Edmunds.
Barry and Barry.
Hello,
Barry and Barry, who said the following.
Hello, Barry. Oh no, that's the Chuckle Brothers.
It's a different Barry in Bury St Edmunds. Said, Sidney, thanks so much for a fantastic and entertaining podcast. I listen on the train to work and have to say that you really are my favourite podcast presenter. I often think about you and I gaming together. What an exciting thought. I was wondering, with all the news about D-Day in the media, do you think we should bother with what-if gaming when there are so many historical scenarios we could choose from? Well, Barry, that's a really interesting email, and I'm going to hand over to Nick in respect of the first thoughts on that question.
Well, my first thoughts are, I wonder how long his journey to work is. Because if he's thinking about you for too long on the train, Sid, that could be a reason for some of the major delays on East Anglia trains. But it's a great question, actually. It's a real one that we work with every single day, actually, this idea about whether you use historical games or whether you go for a what-if game. I think...
Can you tell me the question again? Because I was laughing so much that I didn't actually hear it.
For the benefit of the tape, Sidney.
I did think that Barry's email was very clear. Would you like to...
It's certainly clear on certain points.
I think Barry's email is very clear. Our interpretation of it is the bit that needs washing out with soap.
I shall read the second paragraph on Barry's email again, with apologies to Barry. So Barry writes, I was wondering, with all the news about D-Day in the media, do you think we should bother with what-if gaming when there are so many historical scenarios we could choose from?
Oh, that's an interesting question, Barry.
It is, and as I was saying, it's one that we wrestle with quite a lot, and actually it's...
Sorry, carry on.
It's, we produce lots of what we would call historical scenarios and historical campaigns. I guess the big thing that goes with historical campaigns and historical war games, of course, is that they require effort, they require work, they require lots of research if you want to try and replicate on the tabletop an individual action in the way that it happened historically on the day, with realistic forces, realistic tables, realistic scenarios, as close as you could possibly get them. I guess you could argue that every war game is in some ways a bit of a what if, because as soon as you rewind the tape to a point in time and then press the start button, you potentially get a different narrative from that point. But we, I know, put a lot of effort into these historical campaigns and games, and so for us there must be a reason why we do that. I think it's about trying to learn things and appreciate what happened in that historical event as close as you can without getting in your TARDIS and going back there. But it's very hard to get it exactly right, and I don't believe that any of ours, I don't think we can claim that any of ours are absolutely accurate, but we work hard to make ours accurate. So for what if games, I guess the criticism of what if games is the further you go away from that historical narrative, the easier it gets to research. Actually, it says in some ways you could argue that you just make these things up. Of course, it's much easier to balance a what if campaign or a game than it is a historical game. A historical game is likely to be much more one-sided, potentially, for instance.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, a what-if game could simply be picking up a copy of Chain of Command or any rule set and going, oh, let's play scenario 4 in the back, which is attack on a whatever, and that, you're not doing any historical research for that. You're just simply using one of the scenarios provided and getting a game and go, right, well, you're allowed X number of support points and I get half that, and away we go.
Well, you're relying on the game designers who've done a bit of that research for you, aren't you?
Well, but the research there in terms of designing, with Chain of Command, actually, the interesting thing that I tried to do was create 6 scenarios that could almost be applied to any situation. And the idea is that over the 6, you replicated what is effectively a mini campaign, if you like. The first one, you're probing against the enemy's positions, then you've got an attack on an outpost line, then you've got an attack and defend on the main line of defence, then you've got, you know, the potential breakthrough scenarios of, you know, a flank, I can't remember exactly what order they come in, but the flank attack, and then finally you've got the attack on the objective. So those, yes, there is historical research in that, in terms of designing scenarios that create a situation which replicates a certain point in a military operation. And then, of course, you've got other ones such as a rear guard and so on and so forth, which actually is one of the ones in there. But I think the difference there is that, you know, those scenarios, for the people playing them, have no historical research attached to them. It's just a case of taking a scenario and putting it on the table. The difference comes when you decide you maybe read a book about whatever subject you want. For example, I was listening to a podcast this morning on the way to pick up Sid, which is a great historical podcast about World War II that I've only been introduced to in the last week, which is called We Have Ways of Making You Talk, which is the historian James Holland and comedian and sometimes pub landlord Al Murray talking about World War II. And they were talking about Stan Hollis on D-Day.
We know that route very well, don't we?
Well, we do, yeah. And wouldn't it... That's the type of thing where, wouldn't it be interesting, you think, I've just read this book on Stan Hollis, I'd love to play that game. Now, of course, there's different degrees of research that could be involved. You could just be reading a book which mentions him and you say, wouldn't it be interesting to set up an attack on some bunkers? Or you could read the regimental history of the Green Howards, which I've actually bought recently. It cost me 200 quid. It's such a rare book. And you could then go and walk the battlefields, which again I've touched on. Nick, you and I went to the bunkers that Stan Hollis attacked on D-Day, although we haven't gone further inland. That is something I'd like to do and follow that story through. But there's no end to the amount of research that you can do, but you don't have to. You can pick a point on that spectrum and decide, you know, just how much you want to do. But I think the important thing is that if you've got a historical action, it provides you with a benchmark for deciding how successful you've been. Because I think one of the things that we look at when we put a war game on a table, and particularly using, let's say, one of the set 6 scenarios out, the rules, have I won, have I lost? You know, what do I achieve and how well do I achieve it? Well, when you get a historical action, sometimes you ain't going to win, but it's having a benchmark to say, well, I did better than they did on the day. Yeah, and often that can be a challenge and something that's interesting in its own right.
I think also, when you are playing a historical scenario, you have an insight as a result of doing that. So, you know, World War I scenarios that we've played on Passchendaele, Boer War scenarios that we've done, World War II scenarios. I think as a result of each one of those, winning or losing, or actually having a good game or a game which is slightly clunky and you want to refine, the net result is always that you approach history slightly differently. Your historical research before and after that game are different, because you're bringing different things to the aftermath of the game as a result of having played that game. And I think that's something which is its own reward, as opposed to just doing it because you think that you should.
I think there's also the interesting point is that we're finding this very much with the research we're doing for Arnhem, Nick, is that when you are attempting to put scenarios together in a manner which reflects what happens historically, sometimes it means you've got to tweak the scenario. You can't just take an off-the-shelf scenario. We were playing the set craft campaign at the club the other night, and a good friend of ours, Don, who's a member of our club, said to me, which scenario is this from the book? Is this the probe scenario from the book? I said, no, it's actually none of the scenarios from the book. It's kind of a version of this with a bit of this added in, because to replicate the issues that are happening at that particular place at that particular point in time, we've actually not taken anything off the peg. We've created something unique and special.
I think that applies very much to the Crossing of the Valor game that we've been working on. So,
Totally.
so absolutely one of the most iconic actions from the Arnhem campaign is the 504 parachute infantry, crossing the River Vaal in small Goatley boats. Small canvas boats that come up through the British column. We've all seen a Bridge Too Far film. We've all seen Robert Redford rowing across with his rifle butt. And actually, you think, well, if there's going to be a Market Garden supplement for Chain of Command, how can you not have the Crossing of the Vaal in there? Well, the challenge about taking on a scenario like that from a historical perspective is, firstly, that the river is very wide. Secondly, there's a gap of about 600 to 800 yards the other side of the river from the river to the German positions. And where's the war game here? Is the war game in rolling dice to shoot at boats in the river, or is the war game about the Americans pushing onto the dike and capturing the positions on the dike? And if it is about that, how do you have a river crossing game that doesn't have a river in it? And all the kind of ideas of how you can bring that historical scenario to the tabletop in a way that's entertaining and fun, and, as you say, Sid, allows you to appreciate and understand what happened historically, is a major challenge. And if you go for historically accurate gaming, I'm really reluctant to use that because I don't think there can be such a thing. Yeah.
Historically plausible. I think it's the best we can.
That's right. So you have to think about where you're going to compromise on this and how you're going to make those kind of scenarios and setups work.
Well, I think that's a really interesting example. There is a point that we've got to say, just because things are historically based as scenarios does not by themselves make them into better games.
No.
You could take an example of the first day of the Somme offensive in World War One, and you could have a war game which is all based around the initial attacks of one of the British infantry divisions, which really doesn't get to the German lines. Now, you would have an interesting process of researching that. You would have an interesting process of thinking about the British attack formation and the German defensive formation, but essentially that would not necessarily be a great game. It would be a sobering, fairly miserable experience, and would bring you a great understanding, potentially, of just the horrors of industrialised warfare. It wouldn't necessarily be a great game.
But the whole process would be greater than what you would have taken had you just thrown a few figures on the table and said, we're going to do scenario 2. Because by playing that game, you are appreciating and understanding history more. So you're using the war game as a tool of exploration.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, because there's a distinction between a game which is a balanced competitive experience and a game which produces a military understanding or an attempted understanding or an experience of history. And the sweet spot is possibly both. You really want both. You want to have a game which is both competitive and fair, or evenly balanced, at least as regards the victory conditions, as opposed to the number of forces on each side. But at the same time, if you can have an element of developing a historical understanding of what you're doing, I think that's all for the better. Sorry, go ahead, Nick.
Well, I was going to say, actually, this is easy for me to say, but I think that the importance of a balanced diet is very paramount in wargaming. I think you can play a lot of historical games. You can also play a lot of games that are completely non-historical in terms of makeup. We've had a classic example that sticks in my head was the game that we saw many years ago, Rich, where the Confederates took on the Zulus. Do you remember that game?
I do.
Salute many years ago. And people had great fun playing a game that was Confederates versus Zulus. And actually, why not? Why wouldn't you want to do that for a bit of something a bit different?
Because I wouldn't want to do that, because I've got better things to do in my life. Honestly,
So there's a limit then. That's taking it too far away from the historical narrative.
I don't subscribe to the idea that that in this very modern idea that everything's as valid as everything else. I simply don't agree with that.
So what about taking the Second World War on into Conflict 46 or whatever these things are called?
People enjoy doing that. That's absolutely fine. But for me, it doesn't tick the boxes for me.
Does that go beyond what ifs?
It doesn't go beyond what ifs. It's fine as a what if, but for me, there are literally, we're looking at what's been happening in D-Day in Normandy with the 75th anniversary. You could literally spend the rest of your life playing a war game every day at the platoon level, and you would never run out of things to do in Normandy. And if I can then combine that with doing the historical research and playing games that are going to inform me and instruct me, but also be fun to play, then I'd rather do that. Now, I wouldn't criticise anybody if they want to play a game with My Little Pony fights Conan the Barbarian. That's fine.
That's good. So we can start working on that rule set next then. I think, for me, I think historical campaigns...
I think somebody's already done it.
Historical games, they do require research. They're very often one-sided because history tends to create one-sided actions, and can be an issue for gaming. Historical scenarios, of course, you could say it's a downside. They're familiar to everyone. If you go into a historical scenario, potentially your adversary or opponent also knows how this scenario unfolds or what forces you might have. The other thing about historical games, of course, is that actually if you're going to do them, they require historically accurate forces. Now, this often involves sometimes, there may be troops that you don't have. So actually that's a question about, where do you find these things? And certain kits don't exist in certain scales, as we know. The models just aren't there. But of course, those historical games can also be great fun. On the other side of it, the what ifs, of course, are dead easy to research. I don't need to worry about doing the research. I can just turn up with my army and play against yours. Okay, and as long as I know the historical context of the campaign I'm using, I can fight British Paras versus Germans in Normandy with realistic scenarios set up. It doesn't have to be a realistic historical scenario. It just needs to be the kind of thing that might have happened, and I can play that. And of course, it uses the toys that I've already got. I don't need to get the historically accurate forces to do that. And it's easier to balance those scenarios as well. So in terms of a game, those what-if scenarios can be really nicely balanced.
Well, of course, it's easier to balance them because all you have to do is take a scenario out of Chain of Command rulebook and apply the point supports that are there, and you know that you've got a game that's going to be balanced because we've spent a lot of time designing those scenarios. But I would agree with you, and they are enjoyable games. But some of the very, very best games and most memorable games that we've had at the club are where one of us, you or I generally, has done the research. We've put the game on the table. We haven't told anybody that it's a historical action. We played it through and then explained to the players what the scenario is about and what happened historically. And the people tend to be enthralled by that backstory and go, wow, I made the same stupid errors as they made, or wow, by moving that machine gun over there rather than having it over there, we actually were able to stop that. And that adds an additional dimension that I think the historical scenario can give. Does that make it better than another scenario? Well, for me, yes, it does. I can't get away from the fact that I think it adds value. It doesn't mean that the scenario out the book with whatever forces you've got is invalid, though.
And that's about command decision making, and you can challenge individuals' command decision making with historical games and also with what ifs. Sidney, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I think there's a degree of overlap here between the two different types of approaches, the sort of the what-if gaming and the historical gaming. It doesn't need to be as extreme as Conan the Barbarian fights your little pony, Richard, but there are certain periods where that historical granular information just isn't available. If you go back to the Peloponnesian War, or you go back to Dark Age Britain, you go back to medieval history, you just won't have that granular information. You will have information, but you may need to extrapolate that. You may need to make plausible judgments as to how things happen. I think that in itself, that sort of alt history recreation, I think that's as much fun as anything.
Well, you're more reliant on things like archaeology than you are on historical accounts, but you can still tell by the shape of a weapon, the way it's designed, what its use is for.
Well, you can do that, but where you get to as a pointed result of that, you end up with people carrying a lot of spiky things. You don't necessarily know how they were used. You take the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
True.
What was a shield wall?
Yeah.
What was the deployment as regards a third type army? Is the third even correct to regard as a force? So you do have to make plausible leaps, and there's a degree of research which is needed there. Yeah. But what you won't have...
It's called Bernard Cornwell.
What you won't have is a map of the battlefield.
No.
What you won't have is a location of the battlefield which is certain.
Yeah.
But you are therefore forced to a degree of what if type of thought.
Yeah.
Now, you've put whatever you're doing in a context, and you don't necessarily have all that granular information.
No.
That doesn't mean that that's invalid as an experience. You're making leaps of, if not imagination, you're making leaps of judgment.
Yeah.
And I think those are an overlap sort of game. You don't have all of the material like you'll have in the American Civil War or the Second World War, but you can still make some really thoughtful games out of that. So it's not just a question of historical and non-historical.
No, it isn't. And I would. I'm thinking about Kriegspiel. So, Richard, his question for you is: Kriegspiel historical gaming, or is Kriegspiel what if? Because in Kriegspiel you've got red and blue. Now, red and blue are not historically accurate forces, and in fact, whenever we've done Kriegspiels based around the Second World War timeline, we actively discourage people from thinking about red and blue as being allied or axis by not allowing them to talk about Tiger tanks or particular sort of brand names of vehicles where we actually make them very general, make the terms very general, which surely must make it a what if, almost a made up sort of timeline. The Discord games have been set in imaginary places with imaginary forces fighting an imaginary war. Is that historical game?
No, it's not. Well, the interesting thing is that Kriegspiel, of course, was not designed to replicate historical actions. It was designed to be a training aid to train officers in anticipation of the skills and the judgment they would need to exercise when commanding in battle. And when you take that forward to things such as the Discord games that we played, which, as you say, have been set in imaginary places with imaginary maps and imaginary forces, then that is a what if, certainly. But I think that's what's interesting about a Kriegspiel is you go through a very, very different experience than you do in a tabletop game. I mean, you say that about the Discord games are this. Well, yeah, the Discord games we played have been this, but the Discord game that I'm planning is very much historical, where all the forces are historical. I mean, I'm doing an awful lot of research to identify exactly what units are where at a very, very complex period of the war, in order to present something that is historically, accurate. Yeah, I mean, I won't even go with the term plausible for this. It's accurate in terms of the way things are set up. So you can take things in different ways. Now, that is very much going to be an historical war game. Although, obviously, as I say, the experience on a map game with people who are in different rooms and different locations around the country is going to make the experience very different. It's much more about command than about toys on the table.
But again, once we press the start button on that game, it becomes a narrative that builds itself from that start point.
It does, but it's still something that still has to be historically plausible in terms of, yes, that could have happened. You can't have a World War II game with a load of aliens appearing.
How are we doing against Barry's question, do you think, Sid?
Well, I think we're doing pretty well. I think we're doing pretty well because Barry said, should we bother with what-if gaming?
Yes.
I think we should.
I think we all agree with that.
We all do.
Yeah.
I think as regards whether what-if gaming can be changed or perhaps even improved by adding a historical context, that's a really interesting development of Barry's question. And I think most wargamers would enjoy even what-if gaming, which is informed by a historical context, whether you've done the research or not.
You're right, and part of that, of course, is about setting games in their campaign context, isn't it? I mean, I've been very lucky recently. I've been one of the beta readers of Henry Hyde's latest book, and I can tell you, folks, that you're in for a treat when Henry brings that out, because the way to handle campaigns is covered in great detail in there, and that includes imaginations, and it also includes historical too. So, you know, it's putting the game in a historical context or in its wider context that just adds to the story, makes it more plausible.
And I think most sets of rules which are published, not just the TooFatLardies rules, but most sets of rules work on the basis that they are war games, historical war games rules, work on the basis that you are going to attempt to have games, whether historically accurate, historically plausible, or what-if scenarios, which match historical opponents. So I remember going back to Renaissance wargaming, there were rules which matched up Mogul Indians against Scottish Covenanters, a bit like your Zulus in American Civil War. Of course, it's possible to play that game, but the rules weren't really written for that, and you used to have atypical and unusual results which were created as a result of that. Now, it didn't stop them being fun games, but it did put a certain tension on the rules themselves, and I think that that's an element which tends to sort of mean that the games that work best, sometimes, depending on the rules, are those with historically plausible matchups. I mean, you wouldn't put, for instance, a Polish army of 1939 against a German army of 1945, because that would not really be a game in which the Polish player had a great amount of chance, one would have thought.
Well, you know, it depends really what rule set you're looking at. I mean, there would be no reason if you were looking at a set of rules which broke everything down for the whole war by points that would stop you doing that. It's no more odd than Zulus versus Confederates. It's just that for me, I would just think, well, it's not really the type of game I want to play. But you know, if you painted up a 1,500-point Polish 1939 army and your mates painted up a Waffen-SS Fall of Hungary 1945 army, I'm sure that type of thing goes on. It's just, for me, it doesn't have an appeal. I mean, I look, you don't need to do a lot of research to put on scenarios that are historically informed. I mean, there's a set of books out there published by, I think it's Pen and Sword, called Battleground Europe, which are all about, you get Evesham or Goodwood or whatever. They're little guides to walking the battlefield, but they're very, very clear. They're guides to walking the battlefield that can be used on the battlefield or in your armchair at home. And they're very good because they tend to use historical maps of the period, and they give you a great little insight into each of those major battles of World War II. And inside it, there are dozens and dozens of little historical actions that all you would need is to read that and think, oh, I fancy that, and put that on the tabletop. Yes, of course, you can go out and buy regimental histories and go to Kew and look up battalion diaries. You don't have to do that to play a little historically informed scenario. And I would suggest that by having that historical input is the difference between bread and bread with jam on it. And I think we'd all prefer the jam, which is the historical input.
Well, back to food, Nick.
Yes,
I thought
please.
we would be at some point.
A bit early for jam. Jam is sort of 11s.
What about ham?
Ham is alright.
Ham and jam.
Ham and jam.
Well, with that in mind, we're going to be looking out for our breakfast. And I think before we go to that, I think, Barry, we've hopefully answered your question. I think that's a topic which will run and certainly will be one that I'm sure we will on occasion come back to. But with that in mind, for the moment, let's see where that breakfast bar is. So following on from that, we're back in the car and suitably fortified, and just as Barry mentioned,
5-star breakfast from the Golden Arches.
Golden Arches, yeah.
Well, Barry mentioned Normandy, and I thought before we moved to the library, we would just think about whether there's any historical actions from Normandy, D-Day, right up to Falaise and Saint-Lô, for example, that we'd like to put onto the tabletop, but we've just not got around to yet.
Yeah, nice question.
About 1,000 of them, I think.
Yeah, there is absolutely no limit.
Well, Nick, you first.
Okay, well, yeah, so I shall start with 1,000 and work backwards. I would say, okay, so in terms of brevity, the one that's in my mind at the moment, and I know, Rich, you're going to talk about this in a minute, but stimulated by James Holland's book on Normandy, which has just come out, which I've really enjoyed listening to in the car. We've done lots of D-Day, and we've walked lots of the sites of D-Day and researched a lot around that. One of the D-Day actions that's really quite important that I'd like to have a look at is the attack on Port-en-Bessin by the British commandos. Because I think there's a really interesting action to be had there, because of course the commandos are attacking from inland. And there's, I think there's enough content for some really nice chain of command games based around British commandos. So I'd love to do something around Port-en-Bessin personally, if I was to cherry pick one at this precise moment. You ask me tomorrow, I'll have a different answer, but at the moment that's the one that's going around in my head.
It's interesting, isn't it? Such a key action, but not one I've ever seen gamed. This is the thing about what I was saying about Normandy, is that there are so many actions that you could choose to game. There's so much choice, and one of the things I've always wanted to do is do some follow-ons to 29 Let's Go and follow the blue and the grey division all the way down, past St. Lo and all the way to Germany even. But there's some great actions with the Poles around the Falaise Gap, and
I've got to say Falaise and St. Lo would be the ones I'd really want to do.
Undergamed.
I mean, I think there's a huge amount of concentration, quite rightly, on D-Day and Caen, but the actual attack, the start of the collapse of some of the German divisions, and really that attempt to sort of try and hold on in Cobra and what's happening at Falaise. I mean, I think that's really interesting. I mean, another possibility is following a particular unit. There's the well-known Max Hastings book on the Das Reich Regiment. Its journey from Montauban, just north of Toulouse, up to Normandy and its actions until it was virtually destroyed at Falaise. I mean, that's a really interesting series of encounters, both by Maquis and then by real first-line combat forces facing up to the Das Reich. Lots of interesting actions there. You
had some SAS teams involved with the...
We did in Belbasket. Yeah. I mean, they
didn't go well.
It did not go well. The SRE teams were inserted, but they were not universally successful at all, and they really struggled to sort of coordinate their responses. I mean, a really interesting aspect of the campaign, and that was one of the standard bearers for the use of the Maquis, really attriting and stopping the Das Reich as it moved north. But all of those actions, following a unit, I think are interesting over the course of a small campaign. But certainly Falaise and also St. Lo, when everything's just falling apart for the Germans, there's some really interesting command and control aspects to that.
I think also crossing the Cotentin Peninsula, so that drive. Absolutely. There's some great actions along there by Lalande and places like that, where the American airborne advance across an open valley by a massive airship hangar. There's a pint-sized campaign there waiting to be written that connects those actions together as you drive west across the peninsula. It'd be a really good campaign to do. Some great games.
And also stuff around the Orne Peninsula. There's we've obviously got Camp Group von Luck, but there's some plenty of other actions in that area. I mean, you can do some of the German counterattacks which came to nothing.
I'd also be really interested, moving our scale up. A Kriegspiel or a game even, just based on some of the operational aspects, the logistics aspects and the supply of the invasion and how that works as against the German logistics. And I think those are really interesting elements which you mentioned. James Holland's book is really brought out in that, and obviously other works on Normandy, as to what an incredible operation it was by the Allies to be able not only to place troops on the Normandy coast, but actually to keep them supplied.
And also what a frustrating one it was for the Germans as well. That same completely different set of challenges for the Germans. You can't move things by daylight, because it would get strafed on the road. Lots of challenges around what you're allowed to do and the command system that the Germans are operating under. Yeah, great, Sid, I agree.
One of the things that I well remember from about 4 or 5 years ago is when we did the Kriegspiels based on 1918 and the Kaiserslacht. And what a game that became under the sort of set of core blimey rules in one of the summer specials, what a game that became of logistics. Everyone stopped really thinking about fighting divisions. It was all about pressing on.
Can we get the supply build-up that allows us to sustain the offensive? Launching the offensive is easy, it's sustaining it.
That's
Can
right.
you get that Gettysburg? Can you break through the enemy lines?
And Normandy is a campaign which is driven as much by logistics as by anything else. I mean, maybe like any campaign is.
And even more attritional than the Somme or Passchendaele. Incredible.
Absolutely so. And I think that operational level of gaming is something which doesn't need should be connected with our war games. And I think again that brings an extra interest when we're fighting tactical actions, saying, well, you really need to do this. You really need to take this bridge. You need to hold this position for those operational reasons as well.
Well, the answer is Kriegspiel more, isn't it? We need to play more Kriegspiels, develop more thinking around that area.
Yeah, true. But I mean, if I had to put a nail on it, it would be some fighting around Saint-Lô that I'd like to do. Nick, it's
Port-en-Bessin for me. Just you asked the question today.
Say Saint-Lô or Falaise. I'd be really interested in doing some of the Cobra actions around Falaise.
Yeah.
So that was a really interesting discussion. But let's not just be waffling on, because although we have no library with us, we do have a number of book recommendations which caught our imagination over the last few weeks when we've been discussing this podcast. And we're going to look at those in our Not the Library section. And we're going to start, I think, with you, Richard. So we're looking for great reads in respect of Normandy, the Normandy campaign, and you're clearly a guy who's read a lot about that. So what should we be looking out for?
I have. And anybody who follows me on Twitter will have seen me comment about this book this week. I don't normally read general histories because, to be honest with you, I tend to be looking for a bit more detail these days. However, I have just read, or more to the point, listened to on Audible, James Holland's Normandy 1944 book. And I have to say I was really impressed with it. I didn't feel that there was anything earth-shatteringly new in there, which in a way I quite like, because so many books these days are written by journalists or people who are taking a journalistic approach where they're looking to find the sensational. And when you're seeking for something sensational, you're often missing the point. What James Holland's book does is it explains brilliantly what happened in Normandy. And we're not just talking about D-Day, we're talking from D-Day all the way through to the closing of the Falaise pocket. And it rebalances the way that we're looking at things. I mean, for example, one of the issues that he talks about is German panzers, how everybody focuses on the Tiger's got a bigger gun and the Tiger's got better armour and the Panther has got this, that and the other. But he just puts that into perspective by saying, yes, but these things they couldn't be moved. They were completely impractical vehicles. The cost of building them was so colossally high, and the numbers that they churned out were insufficient to really make the difference on the battlefield. They had to be moved by train. They didn't have tank transporters in the sense that the Allies did, whereas the Allies were developing tanks that were there to do the job that was there to be done in a manner that was holistically more appropriate. You could take the Sherman, you could add the Cullen hedge removers, you could turn them into DD tanks. The fact that 9 out of 10 engagements with tanks didn't involve engaging other tanks, and that the Sherman was the right tank for the right job. He also talks about the logistics and the embarrassment of riches that the Allies had compared with the Germans. The Germans had to fight with a degree of audacity because they simply couldn't compete on any other level. The Allies were not there to take the Germans on and fight the way the Germans wanted to fight. The Allies were there to fight the way they wanted to fight and oblige their enemy to come and take them on their own terms. So they were using the industrial might of fully developed 20th century economies to fight against the Germans who weren't focused in the same, or didn't have the capacity in the same way to produce what British and American industry combined could produce. And they refused to take the Germans on in the fight that they wanted to fight, and simply knock them out of the park by fighting them in their own game. And it really did rebalance the way that people should be looking at what happened in Normandy. The fact that the Germans were utterly predictable. They were tactically ingrained in them that you would counterattack immediately against an enemy attack. Well, the Allies had realised this as early as 1917. We're not even talking in the Second World War, and that led to the Allies developing the bite and hold tactics that they did. We'll only take the front line, so we're still in contact with our artillery, and we know that the Germans are going to send their Angriffs troops in, they're going to counterattack, and what we will then do is we will obliterate them with our artillery. And the Germans are still doing that in 1944. He focused on the fact that 10 panzer divisions are in Normandy. There is a higher density of panzer divisions in Normandy than anywhere else in the entire Second World War, and that the Allies were not fighting them with a 3-to-1 advantage, but they're fighting them on parity, and they were writing down those elite German divisions in a way that the Germans had never ever seen before, never experienced on the Eastern Front, by integrating a tactical air force with their ground troops. And it was a total reassessment of the facts that we all know that I felt made it a really, really good book. And when I say good, I do mean outstanding. So I cannot speak too highly of it. It was good to see somebody look at what is so often seen as negatives from the Allied point of view. Their tanks aren't good enough, and actually say, well, they were, for the job that was there to be done, they were absolutely the right tank in the right place.
It's also that resurrection of the terrain as being determinant of victory, rather than Caen being seen to be a complete roadblock, and the inefficiency of Monty as actually pushing through Caen quickly. Caen becomes really the killing ground, which is the breaking of elements of the German army, and actually through those counterattacks, through the fact that Monty can really fight an attritional campaign, the Germans play into his hands, which is not at all dissimilar from what was planned. It just looks on paper that the map isn't moving at all, but actually what's happening is the steady wearing down of the German forces, the German elite divisions, which they just simply cannot replace.
Interesting point you're making there, and this is one that James Holland highlights. He says, logically, if you are the Germans, what you don't do is stand and die close to the coast, because Allied naval gunnery means that you're going to get blown to bits. However, Hitler says, don't retreat 1 yard, don't retreat 1 inch. So the Germans keep feeding in troops into this situation where the Allies not only have a material superiority on the ground and in the air, but also their naval forces can be brought to bear. And logically, the Germans would have fallen back bit by bit, as they did, very successfully in the Great War. And they should have logically have been falling back incrementally, allowing the Allies to advance and batter themselves on a solid position, and then retire when the time suited the Germans to new established defensive positions. But none of that happens, because the Germans are led by a total lunatic, and it dispels the myth of this uber German who is there fighting this brilliant fight. They're not. They're doing stupid things time and time again. So a fabulous reassessment of well-known facts.
And like you, I've listened to that book on Audible as well over the last few weeks, and I like the fact that it takes a fairly Anglo-centric view. It is a very balanced view. It does include narratives and inputs from both sides. It is operational based, so he looks at the whole planning process, the whole logistical piece, the whole method of warfare and background of obviously what gets us to Normandy and what the story is that gets us there. But I quite like the fact that actually it is quite Anglo-centric. He does talk about Montgomery and his background to the plan, how he has his phase lines to the attack, and actually he's quite positive about some of the British inputs and in a way that actually many other books been quite fashionable lately, sort of poo-poo the British input and poo-poo Montgomery. And actually I think that this is a real strength of the book, is that it is fairly Anglo-centric in that regard, allows us to look at it in perhaps a way that other books don't allow. I also think that same view, though, is possibly something that will be levelled at it and say, actually, you know, it's a bit too, is it too Anglo-centric? I don't know. But so if I were criticising the book, if I were an external person criticising it, that might be a comment that I would put to him. But actually, I've really enjoyed it, really loved it, really loved the fact that it had that side to it.
Well, do you know what? I would say it isn't Anglo-centric. I would say all it is balanced. So much.
Well, maybe it restores the balance.
Well, it restores the balance. And actually, if you look at, well, the Great War has been through a huge period of revision, what they call revisionist historians reassessing what actually happened and coming up with different conclusions to the ones that we were being fed in the 1960s by the pacifist movement. I think if you look at the history of what happened in Normandy that we've been fed over the years with people like Carlo d'Este, people who have written books which have been relatively American-centric. Exactly. This actually restores and gives a more balanced view. I would suggest that Holland has not produced an Anglo-centric book, but he's produced one in which the achievements of the British are put up alongside, in equal position with the achievements of the Americans. I mean, it's very easy to say Monty was late at capturing Caen. Well, yeah, but Bradley was also late at capturing Cherbourg and then late at capturing Saint-Lô. Yeah. But you never hear those criticisms levelled at him, because it's totally and utterly understood that, you know, you can't stick to set phase lines that were devised in the planning stage when the enemy doesn't do what is logical and sensible.
I don't disagree. I think it's, you know, I think, as I say, I think it's nice to have that British side put on things, because I think it's missing in other books that do tend to focus a bit more on the American effort, possibly.
Well, I mean, it's as I say, I think that's a restoration of the balance. I think Monty, of course, and James Holland doesn't shy away from that. Monty shoots himself in the foot by being a total and utter twat who you would definitely not want to go for a pint with. But because you wouldn't want to go for a pint with somebody doesn't mean they're not a good general. And we need to get away from this whole idea of personalities. Just because somebody's a nice bloke, it wouldn't make him a good general. Equally, just because somebody's a total tit wouldn't make him a bad general. And I think what James Holland does is neatly rebalance things.
That sounds a really excellent book, and the book I chose is probably at the different end of the spectrum. Because I didn't look so much at the operational level, I really drilled down into the tactical level, and in particular from the German side. And the book I found it's called Normandy Front. That's all one word, and that's Normandy with the French spelling, and Normandie IE front. And that spelling is because it's from the German perspective. D-Day to Saint-Lô through German eyes, and that's by Vince Milano and Bruce Connor. And it's a really excellent book which covers one division, which is the 352nd Infantry Division, which was the German division which was responsible for facing the Americans on D-Day at Omaha. And I first sort of thought about this from really bizarrely watching Saving Private Ryan, and the way in which the Germans were presented on the beaches really as just being a sort of like speed bumps to roll over. I wanted to try and find out more about the unit which was actually stationed there and what those guys had experienced before. And it's a division which was partly made up of Eastern Front veterans and new recruits, and the book is excellent. It drills down into the various components of the division and follows them from D-Day right to the destruction of the division around Falaise and Saint-Lô in July 1944. There's a lot of first-hand accounts from the various veterans. There's also details of the small unit actions which were being fought. There's great granular details relating to difficulties of ammunition supply and logistics. There's details relating to the movements of the various different formations, and it follows just one division through their own journey, which I think is fairly well documented on the Allied side, but perhaps possibly less so on the German side. what I particularly liked about the book also was it didn't sort of drift into that sort of hagiography type of approach of, oh, let's have another book about SS Reich or Michael Wittmann. It's really about normal German soldiers who are in the process of being trained as a decent combat formation but aren't there yet. So it's absolutely perfect for recreating the sort of German units that the Allies would have been fighting on D-Day for the vast proportion of the German combat forces. So I really enjoyed that, and I thought that gave lots of ideas for chain of command scenarios as well.
I think it's really important to, when studying any military action, to look at both sides of the coin, because it's so easy to take a book that's written, let's say, a battalion history, regimental history, or whatever, and they are clearly presenting it from their perspective, which of course is interesting, but it's that becomes far more interesting when you see what the people facing them were saying as well. I think that's one of the reasons why Normandy is such a popular campaign, because it is quite well documented. I mean, especially when you get involved into actions with 12 SS, for example. You've got the Panzer Mayer's Grenadiers book, but I think more, which is a bit of a hagiography to say the least. I mean, it's self-aggrandizement, but it does give you a perspective from his viewpoint. And more importantly, you've got Hubert Mayer's History of 12 SS, which is really, really much more about facts and figures. He being, I think he was the chief staff officer with the division, I can't quite remember, and as I say, we're not in the library. But it makes it very, very interesting when you do have information from both sides of the fence, and sometimes you can see that what one side thinks is happening is actually quite different. So yeah, it's great to have that book, a really important division. I think they were up, I think they were Aramonch as well, aren't they? The 352nd. I think they cover that whole stretch of the coast. So they were coming up against Gold, the landings from Gold, and also Omaha. But yeah, no, really interesting division. Really interesting division.
So I really enjoyed that book. And Nick, what about your choice for Normandy?
I'm going to take an American view. I'm going to actually go with two books because I'm going last and I can. And I'm going to go with two because I think the first one will probably get shouted down as a historical reference. But I'm going to put it out there as something that inspires and can inspire, and also which includes some really nice little low-level unit action descriptions, and has in it some nice little maps as well of those actions.
Right.
And that's SLA Marshall's book, Night Drop. Okay, which instantly I can tell by looking at your face you would poo-poo in many ways. But in terms of,
I really rate Slam. I really, really rate him, and I know there's the controversy around what he said, because apparently he didn't do the research. The reason he didn't do the research is he knew what he was saying was true. It's just unfortunate he didn't back it up, and it doesn't make it untrue. I really rate Marshall.
So in the book Night Drop, anyway, he describes the US airborne operations on the night of the 5th, 6th of June, and the actions of the 6th of June on D-Day, when you've got penny parcels of American paratroopers attempting to secure their D-Day objectives. And he talks in good description, in good detail, about actions at places like Fouchaville, at Lafayette, at Chef du Pont, at the exits from Utah Beach. He talks about Bob Ballard at Les Drury on is that the 6th or the 7th? I can't think now. But really nice descriptions of very small unit actions of American paras landing in the confused night drop, where they come in at, they're too low and too fast, and they're scattered well over the peninsula, and from that you get these pockets of men that build up a base of resistance and then start to take the war to the enemy. And as I say, the maps in the book are quite good for those small village actions. So things that actually lend themselves really, really well to chain of command games, actually.
Right.
And so he gives you everything you need to to play that game. It certainly gives you everything you need from the American side. The German side you'll need to create and come up with for yourself, because he doesn't know doesn't give the detail on that.
No, sure.
But there are other sources that will provide that.
Yeah.
And so I put that out there as the first book because it's really easy to read. You can buy it, or I think actually you can probably read it online. I think it's on Google or something. But it's I don't know if it's hard to get hold of or not. My copy is certainly very well thumbed and very old. I don't know when it was first printed, but the one that I'd say to you to follow up on that, to actually give that a bit of more meat on the bones that he gives, is the book by Phil Nordyke. And I'm not sure if I've actually recommended this before on the Oddcast, but it's called 4 Stars of Valor, and it's the combat history of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, who are the guys who land on and around St Mary Glees and do lots of the fighting around St Mary Glees. You've got Turner Turnbill, for instance, at Newville.
Well?
They're out at Lafayette. Got great descriptions in detail of the actions at Lafayette. So it takes what Marshall provides as a general storyline and puts real meat and more detailed personal accounts on those bones, and gives a really good description of actions right across that peninsula, or certainly centered around that regiment, who are at the heart of many of the fights on that peninsula in that book. And it also goes on that book to talk about their actions in Normandy and Bastogne and beyond. So really, really good recommended source for anybody who's interested in US Airborne.
Yeah, that's a really interesting companion set suggestion. I think that's one of the most interesting areas of Normandy, because so much is exactly the same. I mean, we've been back there several times, Nick, individually and together, and I always find it quite sad, really, that you get a lot of people visiting St Mary Glees and going into the US Airborne Museum there, but not then getting in their car and driving 2 miles down the road to all these different places where the action really took place. I mean, Lafayette Causeway is just the most incredible place to visit, because everything is as it was. And funnily enough, the last time we were there, Nick, the river had burst its banks, the Murderay had burst its banks, and the whole area was inundated as it was in that June in
pretty much, or certainly much easier to imagine what it was like.
Well, do you remember we went down to Chef de Pont and looked across to, was it Hill 30?
Hill 30,
and it was completely, all the countryside was underwater, and it was fabulous walking across that causeway to Coquigny from the Lafayette Chateau there, and just having water, expanses of water on each side.
Well, you can also go to, if you're going out from St Mary Glees, you go out west, but you can also go east. So you go to somewhere like Haut Fournel, which is a little tiny little collection of 8 buildings, something like that. Lovely picturesque Normandy hamlet to visit now. And then you go to the Night Drop book, and you take the map that Marshall's got in there, and you superimpose it on the hamlet that you're visiting, and you read about the guys who hid in the pig pond.
Pig pond.
Yeah. Well,
pig pond.
Well, they went into
a big fish pond.
No, they went into it's like a pig's wheel kind of general village pond, and because they go into this house, they advance into the village. And they go into this big farmhouse to check it out because they think it's a German barracks, and of course all these Germans then move into the village and they then leg it and have a firefight with the Germans who are in the village in strength. I think it's actually an artillery, German artillery that moves through the village. And of course the Americans end up hiding, and this guy hides in this sort of cesspit. Almost using a bamboo tube as a straw type thing, and you can go there and you can see it, and you can
roll in it.
Well, you can actually the pond. To be fair, the pond is not so evident now as it was, but the buildings and the whole way that little action unfolds before you is marvellous. And of course, nobody goes there, so you're walking down the street being stared at by all these locals who think you're there to repossess their house or something. But you can just breathe it in. You can just immerse yourself in that moment.
Pigs are still there then. It's funny, isn't it? As I say, they're all there at the Airborne Museum going, wow, this is incredible, and you think, actually get in your car and drive for 5 minutes and you're going to be at the centre of all these fabulous small unit actions that where people died in a ditch for your liberty, and you're looking at the wrong thing. But fabulous, really interesting.
Yeah, you can go to that San Marco, for instance, where there's that famous bit of videos. It's actually on social media just the other day, which is what brings it to mind.
Right.
San Marco for the Americans are walking down past the church. I remember turning my car around on that junction and realising that's where I was, and almost crashing the car into the church as a consequence of thinking, oh my God, I know exactly where this is and what's happened.
Yeah. Well, it's a very it's a very iconic image, that church with the saints around the wall, isn't it? And those are the recommendations for this Oddcast, Sid.
Well, thanks very much, guys. That's been really terrific, and all those books I think really worth looking at. So we're going to take a break. Enjoy Operation Market Larden, and we'll be back tomorrow.
Hooray! Okay, well, we're deep in the heart of OML, and I've found right at the end of the room a very colourful game designed by Simon Walker. Simon, tell us what it is that we're going to listen to in this next 2-minute segment. What is this game we're looking at?
It's a very serious historical reenactment of the Trumpton riots of 1932.
The Trumpton riots of 1932. So there's a theme in this Oddcast about historical gamings and what-if war games. So you're taking it to a completely different dimension by taking the game to Trumpton. So we've got all the coloured houses that you recognise from the kids' TV show. We've got the Town Hall, Pippin Fort, Windy Miller's windmill, funnily enough.
His large pink erection.
Right, okay, yes, that's there as well. We can also see that sort of shimmering in the distance. Crockett's garage is here, probably somewhere, is it?
Absolutely.
You can see that
his
over
nice
there as
Art
well.
Deco garage.
So go on, tell us about this game.
It's the product of alcohol and curry and Mike Whittaker, mainly, Nick.
So a bit like my kids.
Yeah. And
I don't think Mike Whittaker was involved.
It was his bright idea. It was a long discussion after last year's event.
Yeah.
He gave me a challenge. So here we have what is essentially Chain of Command with a twist. Chain of Command inspired by Trumpton.
Right. So now if I can see him above the cake that he's scoffing his face into, Ralph is playing this game. Ralph, you've been playing it. Tell us about the game.
Sheer lunacy, Nick. Sheer lunacy. It's difficult trying to get the actual stop motion tactics to work properly when you're defending Trumpton Town. But I'm playing Captain Flack, the fireman, and the. Okay. You have to remind me the name of the policeman.
The autocratic mayor and PC McGarry.
PC McGarry, number 452.
Exactly.
That's him.
The very same. We're manning the barricades. The anarchist corn grinders are coming down the roads at us and lobbing petrol bombs everywhere, essentially. We've had IEDs, courtesy of the milkman and the flour seller, which we dealt with swiftly. But I think we're starting to get a little bit overwhelmed.
Yeah.
We managed to get an armoured car on over the side there, and that's been overwhelmed as well. So it's down to Snorty and the boys from the fort.
Well, hopefully they can hold the day. So are you playing Chain of Command unadapted, or what have you done to it? What have you done to our rules?
What have we done to your lovely rules? Essentially it's Chain of Command, but instead of the normal Chain of Command dice for command activation, we're using the sharp practice cards, partly because it's slightly more heroic and silly, and also because it means in a game like this where we're tied down to a 3.5 hour timescale, it makes it easier for everybody to get involved rather than one person making carefully considered decisions and everybody else sits around and watches, which we're trying to avoid. So it is slightly more chaotic, as Ralph says, but hopefully everybody gets more involved as a result.
And it is worth, I think, making a shout out to whoever it was that put the effort into the building. So was that all your work, Simon?
Absolutely, none of it whatsoever.
Any of that credit you want to share with anybody?
Yep,
or shall we keep them in the dark?
The building's built by Mick Brook of Red Vectors, who's also here today.
Red what?
Red Vectors.
I thought you said Red Rectums.
You know him. You know him better than me. And most of the figures painted by the inestimable Mr. Slade.
He must have been down to home base and cleared out all the pastel-coloured emulsion.
Absolutely right.
To get the buildings done.
Yep.
Well, look, I have to say, mate, it's a great-looking game. It looks great fun. You've got some real war game celebrities around the table playing it as well. Is Pear playing this game, or is he somewhere else?
No, he's
just come along to enjoy the spectacle. But Johan is here, and of course Ralph himself is, is glitterati of the highest calibre. So
we have the Lard aristocracy here. You're self-excluded, of course.
Of course, absolutely. Well, I'd love to be in 2 places at once, and I am trying hard to do that. So I'm going to go and have another cake and see if I can expand myself into your game. So thank you for talking to us, Simon. Great game. Have a great day.
Thanks for your interest. Thanks, Nick.
Well, here we are. I'm here with Jim Ibbotson. Jim, this is a fabulous looking game. Tell us about the game that you've been running this morning.
Well, I've been reading some books about the swamp fox in the American War of Independence, Francis Marion.
Yeah.
And what I tried to do with this game was, Marion's not on the table. He was off raiding a British supply depot and made off with molasses, pork and salt, which he took down to the Santee River, trying to load it onto a ferry. But in the meantime, the British patrol was trying to force them to disperse and leave the supplies on this side of the river. And Marion knew that this was a possibility, so on the only road down to the ferry, he put one of his subordinate lieutenant colonels with a small group of the Craven County militia to stop any British approach down to the river. And that's what we played today. Wow. And the Craven County militia didn't do a very good job of stopping the British.
Yeah, and just remind us, who was playing those militia?
Nick Skinner was playing the militia.
That's right, and he ended the game on a force morale of 0, I believe. Is that right?
Yep, 0.
And, I had the British, and what was my force morale at the end? 10. 10, that's right.
10. It was
yeah, so it was in many ways a spectacular victory, would you say? I mean, I know Nick often appears on Lard TV and wins games, but I think it's true to say that here he was truly stuffed stupid.
Oh, he was appallingly disorganised. If I was one of his men, I'd have gone home.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have bothered.
I might be going home, yeah.
Right, well, thanks very much for running that one, Jim. I really enjoyed it, and fabulous looking table, fabulous looking figures. So, yeah, have a good game this afternoon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Brilliant.
Here we are at the curry at OML. There's quite a lot of noise here.
Well, here we are. We're at the post. What are we? The post.
OML 7.
That's it. OML 7 event, and I'm here with Jeff Davis. Jeff, this is not your first OML, but you're coming here as a foreigner. How have you found the welcome?
I like how the English treat me, Richard. Very nice people, the English. Yes, I like them very much.
Good. Right, and what games did you play today, Jeff?
I played Malayan Cock.
A what?
Malayan Cock.
Malayan Cock, right. Okay.
And Up Uranus.
Right, okay. I'm not really sure we can use this material.
And we're back. Good morning. Sunday, the 9th of June, and we are post OML 7, and we're travelling back towards Lard Island. And I'm here with Rich and Nick again. How was OML for you guys?
Fabulous, really great. Really just lived up to everything that you could have expected. Fabulous games, fabulous company. And really great to see people travelling from all over the country. We had guys from Scotland, from Cornwall, so really from Kent, all 3 corners of the UK. Guys coming down who I met last year at Ebor Lard up in Harrogate in Yorkshire. Had driven all the way down, and really great to see the effort that people make to come along. Talking to 2 guys from Oxford over a pint last night, chewing the fat about the state of history education in the UK, and they were saying that OML is their best day's gaming of the entire year. And these are guys who come along every year, and it was lovely to share the gaming experience with them, but also sit down, have a few pints with them afterwards, to go along and have a curry in what must have been the noisiest Indian restaurant I have ever been in my entire life. largely down to about 40 lardies swilling beer and scoffing curry.
I did feel very sorry for those people who enjoyed a nice romantic early evening curry when 40 fat blokes are lining up outside.
Yeah.
And then the gates are opened and they sort of slobber into the restaurant.
It was like a tsunami of lard, wasn't it?
It was.
But yeah, great fun. I mean, I had to move to the smaller table because I literally couldn't hear anything anybody was saying.
And we did burst out the fire exit at the other end.
Yeah, we did actually have to expand into their backyard
as we consumed more food and grew. We kind of swelled the place.
It was like letting out another notch on your belt. Just we extended the tables and burst out into the backyard of the restaurant. But it was funny. I mean, we had a real laugh. I mean, it was great. You know, I was on the table with a load of the lads from Wales and the lads from Yorkshire, and we just talked complete and utter bollocks and laughed the whole evening long, which was, you know, it's what it's all about, isn't it?
That explains why it was so loud then.
Probably, yeah.
Well, it was. We say a lot with Lard Days that the games are great, the people were great, and I think we forget. I think because we're so lucky to play in these days and go to so many of them, that they are really good spectacles. The games that were on yesterday were the highest standard games I think we've ever had at OML,
and we've
without
had some
exception.
Incredible games.
Yeah, absolutely. Every year the bar. You think we can't. The games can't be any higher quality than the previous year, and yet you look at the terrain and the games and the effort that people have put in to bring something to OML and play with people who perhaps are not played that particular rule set before, or play with people they don't know, or sometimes they're playing with their mates that they do know. But the atmosphere was fantastic. I mean, some of the toys that had been prepared and the work that had been done was superb. We heard earlier from Simon about his Trumpton game. What a lunatic thing to do. But what a tremendously fun game it looked to be as well.
Was. I mean, it was all there. I mean, there was Pippin Fort, Pew Pew, Barney McGrew, Cuthbert Dibble and Grab. The whole lot were there. There were Captain Snort and his soldier boys. It was crazy. And when you walked up, you instantly recognised the Trumpton Town Hall. Now, for anybody listening outside the UK and Commonwealth, Trumpton was a kids' TV programme made with sort of wooden puppets.
Stop animation.
More, not so much puppets, but like wooden toy soldier type figures that obviously were animated in some clever...
Stop motion, it was.
Stop motion, whatever that means, method. And the whole town was replicated there, and Windy Miller and his windmill and the whole lot was there. I didn't get a chance to play that game, so God knows what was going on, but we kept hearing an awful lot of laughter and an awful lot of themed music from the programme bursting out every now and again.
So tell us then what games, I mean, I know because I was your opponent in one of them, but what games did you play,
Well,
Rich?
mate, the first game we played, of course, was Sharp Practice, where, if I remember correctly, at the end of the game, my force morale had dropped 1 to 10, but yours was on 0, I think, as your troops fled from the table.
Yes, what other games were there?
In the afternoon, I played World War I Chain of Command with Alan Sheward, who's always puts on fabulous games. I mean, his Stalingrad game was a wonder to behold in previous years, but this one was absolutely fantastic. We had a German attack coming through. The idea was that this was the Kaiserschlacht 1918, and the German lead stormtroopers had attacked through this area and bypassed an abbey, which was a strong point held by French forces. And this was the follow-up German forces whose job it was to take out this strong point. And it was a fabulous table with this network of trenches, and as a centrepiece, this huge destroyed abbey. Just fabulous to play on, and really, it didn't matter who won or lost. You just had so much joy playing on that table.
It was a game that people will recognise because it was the game, also the same terrain, that won I think it was the award for best participation or best game at Partisan. So people will have seen it probably, and so to get a chance to play on that table.
Oh, fabulous. Well, I didn't get a chance to see it at Partisan, other than very much in passing as I whizzed by, because we were running our own Chain of Command Malaya game there. So it was great to not just have a chance to, have a detailed look at it, but to play it as well. I mean, I have to say as well, the sharp practice game we played in the morning, which Jim Ibbotson ran and had painted all the fabulous figures for and the terrain, was a masterpiece in its own right.
Indeed, absolutely.
The terrain was relatively minimalist, but the fact that he being of an artistic bent, he can really dress a table in the manner of a set dresser at the theatre does, and paint a picture and bring a story to the table with the way it was laid out. And the modelling methods that he described to me for making his roads and his fences were all simple stuff, but it's just having that eye for detail that he has that really brought that to life for me.
Quality is the word, I think, that you associated with Jim's games. It's the high quality of the preparation, the high quality of the figures.
And that's always the case. And actually, I have to say, it was the first time that we've ever had a chance to play on one of Jim's games, because they're so heavily subscribed. But I had a word in his shell-like some time ago and said, Jim, this time we're going to play in your game. Please make that happen. And he, pulling strings like a string-pulling dervish, he managed to make that happen for us.
But there is no video evidence of you having beaten me, so...
no, but I have got an interview with Jim that I'm going to be editing into this, where he confirms that you were ground into the dirt and humiliated.
Oh, excellent. We look forward to it.
In fact, we can cut to that now.
Yes, very nice. Well, in the afternoon, I played Bag the Hun. I went back to my roots and played... Welsh Jeff was there. With a game that had been prepared with Mike Hobbs, but Mike Hobbs sadly was unable to join us. So Jeff ran the game on the day wearing his T-shirt that said Mike's Little Helper on it. Yeah. So he was umpiring that game. It was a Malta convoy game. So we had a tanker with a couple of light merchantmen steaming towards Malta with a couple of destroyers and escorts, and they were being attacked by 2 catcher of Stuka, so 6 Stuka,
right,
and 6 of the Italian SM-79 torpedo bombers.
Right.
So quite a large force being sent out to attack these ships, with some CR-42 Italian escorts, so the biplane Italian fighters from
lovely. I know the one.
Which are also used in the Battle of Britain, of course. That makes a nice little angle on there.
If I recall.
The Chianti Raiders, as
that's
one
right.
of the text calls them. Yeah. So there was a section of those, and a section of Messerschmitts as well, 109s, who were I think led by a junior ace. Where myself and Ty Callahan Jones plays that game. From the British side, we had 6 Hurricanes each out of Malta,
right,
and we were up against Vlad and Pear at Roller 1, who were playing the Italians and the Germans. And we did manage to bag a couple of the Germans. I shot down a Stuka, and Johnny Danger got a Messerschmitt that he exploded into a ball of flame. But I have to say that the Stukas got through. It was interesting from the perspective of the historical narrative, in that the Stukas got through first and dive bombed the merchantman, and actually caused engine damage to the tanker and caused it to stop. So the tanker was immobilised, and then the torpedo bombers came in and dropped their deadly load. So we had 6 torpedoes in the water at one time, which was exciting. In terms of how the game developed. You see these torpedoes snaking across the water towards their targets, and luckily for the British, strategically, but unlucky for the merchantmen who were on one of the small escort vessels, the vessel, actually, the torpedoes hit one of the small merchantmen that were in the way of the torpedoes in the tanker. So the tanker was saved, but the small merchantman took 3 direct torpedo hits, which sent it to the bottom. So great little narrative, great game, and good to get to grips with Bag the Hun again, and very immersive as well. I didn't actually take myself from that table to look at any other games at that point. So Sidney, what about you, my love?
Well, I played on the same game as you and Richard did in the morning. I played on the World War I game with Al in the Abbey with Ian as well. Actually, you didn't play on it, Nick, but you did, Richard. And it was a great game.
It was fabulous.
Superb terrain and a very good setup. I really, really enjoyed that. It's a long time since we've played World War One, and it just reminded me of just how interesting and how much fun it can be. There's Germans against French, which is always an interesting contrast, and very, very good game and really enjoyable. On the afternoon game, I played on A. Deacon's game of the French-Indian Wars.
That looked great.
And that was a really interesting game. Superb opponent in Ed Morris, who's a real gentleman. But Aid had really excelled himself with the figures, and also the terrain was really good looking. But the game itself, I think, was really interesting. You think of sharp practice as being perfectly suited to Napoleonic, maybe 7 Years' War in Europe, but it plays a really interesting game of the French-Indian Wars, which is typically asymmetrical. You've got the British in the forest and a relief column, and you've got the French allied Indians attempting to ambush the English, and it just showed up the two different complementary sort of strengths of each of the sides. The British with their superior firepower and discipline, but the Indians with their fairly terrifying assault techniques and the psychological terror they can inflict on the British. So a really, really interesting game and really well umpired by Aid.
It reminded me of Braddock's column, that game, although the table again was really, really interesting because it was basically a valley, and on the flanks of the valley on either side, so if the table was running if it was a 6x4 table, the valley ran from one 4-foot end to the other 4-foot end, and on the two 6-foot flanks you had they were raised, they were the flanks of the valley, and they were covered in pine trees, and really that was the table. But what was so interesting is the way Aid had added clumps of rock formations that really brought the terrain to life. I mean, it was such a simple table in terms of the terrain, but it looked absolutely convincing.
Unlike a lot of the great games that we've played at OML over the years, it had at its heart a really simple scenario, so everyone could easily understand it. You were getting the relief column from one side to the other side, the long side of the table.
Yeah.
But that simplicity of the scenario allowed a really interesting game to develop. And we talked with Aid a little bit after the game about the different play tests and the possibility of using more jump-off points or movable jump-off points for the Indians, and he got the balance just right. This is about the 5th time he'd played it,
right.
And there'd previously been 2 results for the French Indians and 2 results for the British, and this one was a draw. So I fought Ed to a draw. I thought Ed was going to walk it at one point, and then we clawed back, and then we sort of ended up sort of fighting each other, and we ran out of time really. So we got down to
fighting each other. That's
but it's always
my money's on Ed.
It's a good sign when you've designed a scenario like Ada's done, which has 2 wins for either side, and the 5th one's a draw. So I think he's got the balance just perfectly in that regard.
What I thought was good as well, games I didn't get an opportunity to play. There was a fabulous Chain of Command World War One game set in East Africa with von Lettow Vorbeck, run by Bob Connor from Exeter. Bob's moved to Exeter. He's always one step ahead of the law, I think, changing his location regularly. But he had a brilliant game there with figures mainly from Brigade Games in the United States, German Schutztruppen and Ascari, up against British regulars and colonial forces as well. And that was just a fabulous looking game with some beautiful vignettes on the table with attention to detail. You know, he had a zebra, the zebra's carcass being gnawed on by some vultures. And
that was, I was talking to him about that. He'd used a zombie dead horse. And got some vultures from, I think, DZ Miniatures that then made a lovely little vignette.
Yeah, it really made a fabulous vignette. And he also had some wildlife on there, you know, an elephant, some hippos swimming in the river, and
crocodiles.
Crocodiles, that's right. And a really great big river steamer. So this was basically a point where some supplies were being dropped off, and the 2 sides were fighting over it. Great looking game, absolutely great looking game. What game's caught your eye, Nick?
I saw, I was drawn to Mark Backhouse's Malaya Chain of Command game. And actually, some more great work done on some superb looking jungles.
Just what you'd expect from a celebrity of the status of Mark Backhouse, regular contributor to WSS Magazine and the WSS podcast. In many ways.
Peaches expert.
And in many ways, wargaming glitterati, really. Talking of which, Neil Shook from Meeples and Miniatures was there with a samurai game based on Dux Britanniarum. So I suppose Dux Samuraiarum could be the case. But
Seven Spears.
That's right.
Which was in one of the specials.
That's right. It was
many years ago now, actually.
Yeah, written by Dick Bax from the Netherlands.
That's him. And we had the Custard Guzzlers were there. They ran a Horns of the Buffalo game. Jason was running that.
Sharp practice in the Zulu War.
Which was certainly a full table. There were thousands of them.
There were thousands of them, indeed. And a great looking game, really good looking game.
Sid?
And there was a fine looking game of Stalingrad as well, which was put on by Tiny Terrain.
And cellars and sewers.
That's right, and
just the type of places you like to hang out.
Very much so, and a really nice modular take on a Stalingrad terrain, something which is really variable and infinitely repositionable. So you would, rather than take the boards out and change the boards in different directions, you had those boards, but also you had modular inserts within the boards, so you could vary the boards and you could vary the inserts. A really clever, imaginative use of urban terrain, which I think a lot of people will be trying themselves at one point or another.
It did make me laugh every time I looked at that game. There were people looking at the little children's playground on there, and everybody was checking to see if the roundabout went round.
Did it?
No, it didn't go round, but everybody checked. Does the roundabout go round? There's something psychological, clearly, from our childhoods.
If you want to see some photos of these games, they're on the TooFatLardies Facebook page or on our Twitter accounts. There's images of them there. Are there any that we've missed out? I'm kind of nervous.
There are so many blooming games. It's difficult to run through things like this because Mike Whittaker's I've Been Shot Mum. Mike Whittaker's fabulous game set in Italy, really good. I think that was basically about capturing some downed pilots from a spotter plane, but I didn't get a chance to play that. But I had a chat with some of the guys who were having fun with that, which looked really good. But I do feel that we've probably forgotten something, and if it's you, I do apologise. There were so many great games there because I don't know how many people were there, but it felt like about 60 people. It was absolutely rammed, wasn't it?
So there we go, and I think from all three of us, thanks a lot to Aid and Patsy, his wife, Liam and Connor, his sons, for really helping with all the work.
Cakes.
all the cakes and all the work from OML, and thanks also to everyone for coming long distances and for supporting that. And I think now it's just about time to have a look at what events are coming up on the Lard calendar.
Yeah, from one event onto the one event past to events future.
That's right. So we're starting off with the Buckeye Gamers, who are running a water tanker event at the Origins Game Fair at the Greater Columbus Convention Centre in Columbus, Ohio.
That's this week, isn't it?
That is indeed this coming week from June the 12th to the 16th. And the event times are at Wednesday 12th at 1 p.m, Thursday June 13th at 10 a.m, Friday June 14th at 6 p.m, Saturday June 15th at 11 a.m, and finally Sunday June 16th at 10 a.m. So why not join the boys down there and have some tanking fun? And next up, we've got a big lardy event across the pond. And this is going to be Historicon, which Nick's got all the information about.
So Historicon, it's going to be held on July 10th to the 14th of July at the Lancaster County Convention Centre in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. That's in the United States of America, in case there's any confusion.
Amish country.
Yeah, this will be the first HMGS convention held at the site after years at the venerable Lancaster host, with stops at Fredericksburg, Virginia and elsewhere. Of course, the host is now almost completely renovated and rebranded as the Wyndham Lancaster Resort and Convention Centre, and HMGS will be returning there for Cold Wars in 2020. Historicon 19 is actually going to be the 6th convention for Lard America, having started at Fall in 2017. This year there can be 25 games on tap, making it the largest presence there. Our games cover a number of TFL titles, including Chain of Command, Water Tanker, Sharp Practice, Dux Britanniarum, and Kiss Me Hardy, one of my favourites. We should play
One of
more
our
of that.
favourites. We should play more of that.
All of our games will be co-located in one of the main gaming areas, and according to the convention events coordinator, we have a good spot.
Whoa, you can't beat a good spot.
So, Lard America gamesters Ed Leland and John Emmett have won the Port en Courageux Ultra Award at the last 3 conventions, and they will be back at Historical along with the rest of the usual suspects.
Their games are a joy to behold, so if you are going to Historicon, check out the work that those guys have done, and a big shout out for Ed's wife, who does all the hard work building the terrain for him.
Yeah, well done, guys. It actually,
and gals, of course.
Guys and gals, it sounds like it's going to be a superb event, and great to see Lardies really getting hold of the States, which is lovely to see. More Lardy games across the pond.
And back to Blighty, really, and it's Deep Fried Lard on Saturday, July the 6th at the Musselburgh Rugby Club.
The new.
Okay.
The usual mix of great games and better company, with a hardy core enjoying a few beers and curry after the event, and hopefully myself and Rich will be there to enjoy Scottish hospitality at its very finest. And after that, Ebor Lard will be happening on Saturday the 5th of October in Green Hamilton, between Harrogate and York.
Lovely location, fabulous village hall there, which we used for the first time last year, and an even better local village pub with a great menu and loads and loads of great beer, and in fact loads and loads of great beer was very much the theme of last year's event, and I hope it will be this year. A really, really great event with a great bunch of guys from the Harrogate Club there.
Well, as we get towards the end of the summer, we're pushing to September. Nice to wind down with some tea and scones. So where else would you want to go in September other than to Devon War Games Group and Clotted Lard 2?
Oh, delicious.
Which is going to be in Exeter on the 14th of September. Same format as last year in that there will be a number of lard-based games taking place, and you can play one in the morning and another after lunch.
And
so,
celebrity rib breaking.
Yes, we'll be there. Richard will try not to break its ribs this time.
Official event.
So it's a lovely size hall, actually.
Oh,
about
great
12
hall.
or 10 games in.
Great hall.
So there's
and I think we've expanded, actually. I think we're in even more of the hall than we were last
well,
time.
that might explain. There's going to be a £7.50 charge to rent the room, basically, to cover the cost of the room. With any remaining monies going to an armed forces charity.
We earned a lot of money for combat stress last year.
£250, I think,
yeah,
for
that's great,
last
which
year,
is
so
always good. And I have to say, in the book, I don't know the figure for yesterday, but again, we were raising money for combat stress yesterday in the book sale.
We were
at OML 7, and so it'd be great to hear how much we raised there and mention that on the next Oddcast.
Yeah, and of course, as you might expect, after that event in Exeter, there will be a curry and a beer. So that's going to be something to look forward to. Sid, are we done, or is there still more happening?
I think we're almost there, but not quite, because finally, not actually an event, but Frozen Lard is a Facebook page for Lardy Games in Canada. So if you're one of the Canucks from Canada, have a look at Frozen Lard.
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out for another Facebook page, actually, because Andy Crow and Devon Doom have set up a Bag the Hun Facebook page for anybody who's playing Bag the Hun, and they're actually carrying out on there a Battle of Britain campaign using the Finest Hour supplement, and also Squadron Forward as well from the other perspective.
From Joe
so
Hagan,
so they're playing actions and documenting them and sharing those online, and also encouraging other people who are playing Bag the Hun to engage with them and share some of their actions and photographs, etc. There are already, of course, Facebook page groups for our own, being Shot Mum, Kiss Me Hardy, Chain of Command, Sharp Practice, Water Tanker, TooFatLardies main page, of course, itself, and probably others.
Chain of Command Australia is one of my favourites. Always enjoy talking to the guys upside down there. They're really good. Yeah,
and there are some splendid photographs of some lovely, lovely toys that people make on all of these pages. So worth visiting, I would say.
So after an action-packed weekend, that's all for the show. My thanks, as always, for joining us, and we'll see you again for the next Oddcast. My thanks to Rich and Nick and to Roger Barraclough and the gang who are going to play us out. So thank you, and until next time, goodbye.
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 In tonight's show, Sidney Randall was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark, with music by Roger Barraclough and his band.